Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If we could bring ourselves to attention. Welcome to the Transportation Committee meeting for Wednesday, the 4th of September. We have regrets from Councillor Luloff and I believe Councillor Deans as well. Confirmation of the minutes from minutes 3. Is it carried? Carried, thank you. Communications, response to inquiries, Main Street renewal projects. Our first.
All good.
You're good?
Yeah.
Okay. Item number 1 is the presentation from the Ministry of Transportation. We'll come back to that. We have the municipal parking strategy, which we're going to hold for a presentation as well. Yeah, so I guess we'll start with the presentation from the Ministry of Transportation. Good morning. Thank you for coming. Perhaps start by introducing yourselves and then go for it.
Morning, Mr. Chair, fellow councillors, and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Frank Vanderland. I'm with the Ministry of Transportation. My name is Frank Vanderland. I'm the area manager with Ministry of Transportation, and we're here today with our consultant, BTE Engineering, represented by Steve Taylor and Darcy Dillon, to talk to you about our preliminary design study for what we're calling the downtown bridges on the Queensway. So with that, I think I'll pass it over to Steve, through you, Mr. Chair, to do the presentation.
Okay. What I'm going to describe is the Ministry of Transportation's Class CA process for doing new infrastructure or revitalization of new infrastructure. And what I'm going to do is focus on really the recommendations of the study. So to introduce the project, it's a preliminary design environmental assessment study to come up with a plan for aging infrastructure along the Queensway. So there's 4 bridge locations. There's 2 different types of bridges at the locations. 3 of the locations are rigid frame bridges, which are smaller continuous structures that go over top of a municipal street. And the 4th location is crossing the Rideau Canal, and it's a much larger structure. The broader study area that we've considered and advertised is one to describe highway travel routes during construction, and I'll describe it in a moment that there's going to be rapid replacement of these bridge locations, and there'll be diversion routes. So we've advertised for both locally, neighborhoods where people live, as well as a broader study area for where there could be traffic effects during the construction works. So the work program was to come up with a bridge management plan for the 7 bridges. So it was a bridge-focused EA study. It had consultation with the adjacent neighborhoods. We delivered flyers in the study area. We had 2 public meetings to show alternatives as well as recommended projects. And at the end of the process, what we're looking for is environmental clearance for the ministry to carry forward construction of these in the future. So the first bridge types are the rigid frame bridges. So these are the smaller ones that go across the municipal streets. So there's 5 bridges in 4 different locations, and one of the bridges that has no joint in the middle, so it's one bridge across both eastbound and westbound lanes. The bridges constructed in the early 1960s are nearing the end of their service life. They're originally designed for 50 to 60 years service life. They perform very well in that duration, but there's a plan for the future. The work included considering the condition of the existing bridges. They're in fairly good condition. There has been some deterioration in locations. And the scope of the study was to define what we would do in the future. And that included both the short-term strategies for holding strategies until a project can be delivered, as well as assessing both rehabilitation and replacement as either conventional or rapid replacement projects. And that work considered the traffic effects of those 2 approaches to rapid replacement. So some of the issues in the study are around these bridges, form constraints for making decisions. The city has a major transmission water service through the area. Plan is to either accommodate or avoid it. Staging area for the bridges. One of the bridges you'll hear is making use of Valentine Park. Property impacts for adjacent landowners where work is going to be in direct conflict with their properties. Look at the detour routes for all modes of transportation. Consideration of the freeway closures for the rapid replacement projects. And then accommodating cycling through the area. So the recommendations for the rigid frame locations is to replace each of the bridges. It will provide a long, durable structure that can avoid a future replacement project when traffic volumes are actually higher. It's been the consistent recommendation for all the locations, and it's partially because we have actually locations for the rapid replacement staging areas, and that was part of the decision-making process. So this project actually is parallel to a project the ministry completed that I managed for the Midtown bridges from Holland to O'Connor, and these are the next set of bridges to the west. And the context-sensitive design approach is consistent with the 23 bridges that were considered to the west. So there'll be new concrete bridges. They'll have some architectural features consistent with the corridor, and they'll include new lighting as well as landscaping on the four quadrants of the bridge. So I described one of the reasons for the replacement was that we actually had replacement locations to build the new bridges. So we had a long list of locations for staging areas, and these were the ones that were selected. They're in close proximity to the bridges. So for Metcalfe and Elgin Street, we have 3 locations that will be used for both construction of staging areas as well as contractor laydown areas. So those are E1, 2, and 3 on ministry-owned land. There is one E1E location where we've shown a widening of the ministry's area for the staging area, taking one of the parking lanes on Catherine Street, which is currently used for parking. So the main street, so this would be the eastern of the rigid frame locations. We've identified 2 staging area sites, an M1 and an M4. So M4 is owned by the Ministry of Transportation. M1 is City of Ottawa, Valentine Park, and they will become the location for building the new bridges in advance of the rapid relocation. So this diagram is kind of small, but it shows that Valentine Park is the big square with the black line around. Inside that square, there's 2 smaller squares, which are actually the new bridges that will be built in the park. And on the weekend for the rapid replacement, they'll be driven into place. Off to the right of that figure shows the second staging area, and it is owned by the ministry. And it would be a location that the existing bridges could be removed, pulled out, parked, while the new bridges are driven into place. So the effect of that travel route, and that travel route has been selected to avoid crossing the city's 1,200 millimeter water main. We'll go through 2 existing commercial properties. They're owned by the same owner. We've met with the owner. It's a willing seller, and after the acquisition, it would be maintained as property owned by MTO, but that is a technical recommendation to travel through those properties to reach the bridge. Now, the bottom right photo actually shows some of the trees in the park. So the plan would be to maintain most of those mature trees and have the staging areas built farther to the north beyond the trees and beyond the street. So the short-term impacts of the project, there'll be a period of 3 weeks that will have the municipal streets closed. We're not intending to do any one bridge at the same time. There'll be cycling and detour routes during that phase. And then the weekend of the closure, there'll be a 3-day period that everything will be closed, pedestrian, cycling, and vehicular traffic, and we have defined detour routes for that event. And the City of Ottawa engineering staff have been part of the process in planning and reviewing those routes. So the second project, a larger one, it's involved federal lands and approvals. And as part of that process, we've engaged a working committee with Parks Canada and the NCC to review what would be done at the Rideau Canal Bridge. The Rideau Canal Bridge is probably in poorer condition than the rigid frame sites. It was an innovative design at the time. It got slender piers, and the existing piers are all within the canal. And it was desirable from both of our federal partners to see if there was alternatives to remove the piers from the canal as part of the future project. And that has actually been part of the technical recommendations. So the next slide just shows our architectural rendering of the proposed replacement structure. It will pull the piers out of the water. They'll be back behind the multi-use paths on the two banks. It will have a little bit more opening at the two abutments, and it would be a completely new replacement bridge. So there'll be two, one for the eastbound lanes and one for the westbound lanes. So the effects of constructing that bridge project is there'll be two properties that will be removed, and we've met with the owner. There's a single owner for these two properties, and they'll be part of the construction area to actually access the bridge. So that is the Royal Oak Pub and the commercial building to the east of the pub. So during the construction of the Rideau Canal Bridge, I'll show you in a second the staging areas, but we'll also be making use of the Ballantyne Park. That'll be the construction laydown area for the contractor. And there'll be an access route between the park and the bridge site that will go along the Queensway on the ministry-owned property. So this is the plan view looking down from the sky of the Rideau Canal replacement. So in the blue boxes, what you see is that's the location the new bridges will be built. There'll be temporary piers that will be built that will allow sliding of the new bridge into place. And on a single weekend, the existing bridge will be removed and dropped into the canal, and the new bridges will be slid into place. And it's a large project, and it'll require the Queensway to be closed. So while the year before the slide, all the brown areas are contractor laydown areas for the works. So it will be a location to the west of the bridge, one to the east of the bridge in Ballantyne Park, another one to the east of Main Street, and there will be another one down at the Vanier Parkway where materials can be shuttled back and forth to the site. In the plan view, you can see some black symbols on both north and south sides of the Queensway. Those will be crane pads, and the crane pads will be used to bring materials into the new bridge locations. So there'll be delivery of beams that will come in and they'll be moved over into the blue areas. The cranes will also be in place for the demolition of the existing bridge that will be dropped down to the canal on a protective layer. During that 3-week period, there'll be closures of both of the parkways and protective filled material placed on to protect both the assets along the heritage designated canal as well as the two parkways. The event is planned to happen in the fall after the fall shutdown of the canal after Thanksgiving, and to be opened back up at least a 25-meter opening for the skating season after the demolition and slide into place. So as part of that bigger project, it's the same diversion route that we'll use for the rigid frames, but they're routes that have been used for EDR routes and other rapid replacement projects. And all Queensway traffic will be diverted during this period. So we're coming to the conclusion of the study. It's been a 2-year planning process, engaged with the community. This fall or early winter, we expect to have the environmental assessment. That's our transportation environmental study report available for public review. Any member of the public that has participated will be advised of the review period for that document. And the last part is that the construction has not been finalized, but preliminary estimates are it'll be in 2024, 2025 to allow utility relocations, property acquisition, detail design in advance of the projects. And they would all be right now considered to be a single project delivered over about a 4-year period.
Thank you very much for that presentation, and I'm sure there are questions. Before we get to that very quickly, I did not ask at the beginning of the meeting if there were any declarations of interest. So committee members, are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, thank you very much. Just before we go to committee, I have a quick question. Would you mind going back to the slide that had the cross-section of the, going underneath one of the bridges with the sidewalk and the cycling facility and the vehicle lanes? Yeah, perfect. So as we've been redeveloping roads, our engineering team and our finance team has told us that building a raised cycle track, in addition to it being safer, is also less expensive. And so I'm wondering, in an era of provincial austerity, why are we not, or why are you not choosing to do the safer, cheaper option underneath the bridges?
So I'll answer that first. But as part of the planning process, we've engaged the city as part of a municipal technical advisory committee. And at the bridge locations that we've got, we haven't recommended to change the span because of the cost and complexity of changing the founding condition of the bridge. On a normal road, it is actually cheaper to start constructing the raised cycle tracks as opposed to putting on the road surface. But in this location, we've been constrained by the 50-year bridges that have been built. The Elgin Street Bridge is the one that has had the most significant issues over the life of that bridge. It has had significant settlement that occurred right from the very beginning, and we tagged a very high price tag to try to change the location of the existing footings from the pre-consolidated locations that it's been for the last life of the bridge.
Thank you very much. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. And yeah, I had a similar question around that. I've met with you folks before. I've gone through a consultation process as well in the community, so thank you for doing that. And have talked with staff, obviously, about this project. Just off the bat, can you, are these slides all available to us as well? Can you?
If they aren't, they will be after the meeting. Yep.
Okay, thanks very much. You mentioned the fall event after the canal is closed, so anticipating somewhere in 2024, 2025, and so but the 3-week shutdown will be in the fall is when you're anticipating of many of the local routes and the Queensway. Is that correct? Is it the local routes and the Queensway, or just the Queensway shutdown for?
So the projects will be led as one 4-year contract. No one bridge will be closed at the same time. So only one of the bridge locations will be done at a single time. And the Rideau Canal is the only one that has to go in the fall tied to the winter shutdown. The other bridges could be in a different years and they could be in a different weekend. But the Rideau Canal is the one that has to be tied to the...
Okay, so but the bridge replacement shutdown is how many days?
3.
3 days. The 3-week route shutdowns associated with the roads in the vicinity, that's the local roads you're talking about underneath and nearby?
Each of the municipal roads and the 2 parkways, when those bridges are done, there'll be a 3-week period for preparatory work.
After the bridge is completed?
Before the bridge is put into place.
Okay, thanks very much. The Ballantyne Park piece of this is interesting because we struggle with a corner there where McGovern is, the business that you were talking about. We struggle with a corner there. I've talked to staff about this in terms of our cycle lanes, our cycle tracks, our walking through there. And so when the project is completed, it's been my ask and my hope that we get better infrastructure put in for a cycling option there. It's right now, it's unsafe as it is in my view. And so I'd be very interested to know the timing for sort of taking it back after you're done using the park, what will end up there. And so as you know, the project that we're undertaking right now is a Main Street renewal, Greenfield renewal, and that's happening before this takes place. It looks like the timing is going to be, this is going to come after that's already done, which in some ways is great, but the coordination of some of these pinch points that exist is going to be very important to coordinate with our city staff to make sure we get the right result at the end of the day. So I just want to flag that with you, particularly around the Ballantyne Park piece. You said you have confirmation with all the owners along Hawthorne now. Is that right? Everyone has given confirmation of...
Everybody's been contacted, and the landowners that we need property from, we've met with.
You've met with them, okay. But
Yes.
so some of the details are still to be worked out, I take it then, in terms of
Yeah.
some of their businesses. I've just heard from a couple of them, so. And then the timing of the EA, it's coming in, you're expecting it this week, or this year, excuse me?
This fall or
This fall.
early winter?
Okay,
That'll be the 30-day public notice of the review period.
okay, that's great. And I'm hoping we can have a separate meeting specifically on this. These are mostly in my community.
Yep.
There's a little bit in another council community, but I'd like to have a separate meeting with you, just a discussion offline if that's possible. If we can set that up
Yep.
today, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Dudas.
Perfect, thank you. I had a question in respect to your overall bridge replacement or rehabilitation plans. Are there plans to approach East End, further East End bridges coming up in the near future?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do indeed have a long-term plan for the Queensway. As you well know, the Queensway has been worked on for over a decade now, where we've been steadily replacing bridges. This project is one of those projects. We have a project in detail design right now, and it involves the Preston to Percy stretch of bridges. As you know, a lot of the bridges east of here have been replaced, like Lees Avenue, Vanier, all of the Serval. Those have also been replaced already. And we're working our way out toward the east end of the city right now. The Ramseyville Road bridges are being replaced. So yes, to answer your question, we do have a long-term plan for the entire Queensway.
Is that available in advance? I know you're talking long-term, we could be talking 10 years, but I'm just thinking, it's always good to look forward to opportunities for the city to work with you for that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, absolutely, that's available. It's a living plan. Obviously, as we get into different priorities, it does include components, for example, the noise barriers along the Queensway that need to get replaced, and so there's a lot to this plan, and I'd be more than willing to share that with you.
Okay. And I had one more quick question. You're currently working on, it's kind of related to this, but it's bridge work. You're currently working on the overpass for the Innes Road, and that's been a massive pinch point for the east and people heading east and people heading west in the morning. I know some concerns from residents have been brought to your attention in respect to the fact that there's a lot of clogging at that point. Has there been any solution identified as to how we can make it easier for people? Because I understand this is going to continue into next year for this construction.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. The work that has been happening on Innes has had a huge impact on traffic. We've been working together with city staff to try to minimize the impacts. I think what we have out there now is it's different phases that the traffic diversion goes through. But right now it's the most efficient way of doing things at the moment. But we are more or less in continual contact with city staff to monitor traffic and to try to make adjustments as we can. So unfortunately, yes, it does have a huge impact on traffic, but I always like to say short-term pain for long-term gain, right? So that's really where we're at.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. And I'm sorry, I want to come back to Councillor Blais' initial question with respect to cycling and pedestrian improvements under the underpasses. I didn't quite understand your reply to that, so I'm taking a look at Elgin Street, and that's a really hostile cycling and pedestrian environment underneath there. What is preventing that from being rebuilt with wider sidewalks and cycle tracks?
So the Elgin Street Bridge has a history of very poor soil conditions. It had major consolidation even in the 1960s when the first bridge was built. There's complexity if we tried to change the span of that bridge, and we reviewed, we put a pretty high price tag on it. I'm not sure what the number is exactly. And we've recommended that it not be widened, and if there was other means of providing cycling connections, that should be considered. But we did take a look at it. Right now, we've recommended it would be expensive and complex for both the existing bridge, and there's some sliver widenings to the Queensway in that area that would also be another complication for the Elgin Street Bridge.
So take me through this as someone who is not an engineer. What would be the impact of trying to make wider sidewalks and cycle tracks on Elgin Street under the bridge?
Yeah, so what it would mean, I'm going to try pointing, but the abutment locations would have to, point the abutment? Yeah, so the abutment locations would have to move back. So it would be in a location that wasn't pre-consolidated. And it'll be done on this weekend where we're going to lift out the old bridge and we're going to set the bridge back in. And what we're trying to do is put the new footings back in the location of the original footings.
So those abutments have to stay where they are. Do we not have flexibility, though, with respect to things like lane widths and lane configurations? I note there's a verge between the northbound and southbound lanes.
And from the bridge planning perspective, there's no issue with changing the things between the front face of the two abutments.
Is that a discussion that the city and yourselves would work on, or?
I think it would be completely a city decision of what happens on the municipal street between the abutment faces.
Okay, and you're not digging that street up when you're doing the bridge? The existing lanes and existing sidewalks stay?
It's limited to the footprint around the original footings, so maybe 2 or 3 meters in front of the face of each footing.
Understood. Okay, that helps to clarify it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify, I'm trying to follow you. I understand there's a Metcalf Bridge section, I understand there's a Main Street one, I understand there's one over the canal. I count that as 3 bridges. Maybe from a technical point of view it isn't, but are we missing other crossings?
No, so this location has 4 locations, there's 7 bridges, and we're just counting when they're separate. If you go underneath them and you look up, you can see daylight between 2 bridges, between the eastbound and westbound lanes.
But it's at those 3, so Canal, Main Street, and Metcalf.
So Metcalf is the location that has 1 bridge. They're joined for both east and westbound lanes, so that's 1. And then Elgin Street has 2. The Rideau Canal has 2. And Main Street has 2.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. No further questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. Appreciate it. Item number 2 is the Municipal Parking Management Strategy Refresh and Governance Review. Just remind members in the audience that if you'd like to speak to this item after the presentation, you can register at the desk over by the television screens to my right.
For my item, can I?
Good morning, members of the Transportation Committee. I'm Lila Gibbons. I'm the Director of Roads and Parking Services. Chair, we're here today to present our recommendations of the Municipal Parking Management Strategy and the results of the governance review. I'm joined today by Ms. Franklin of MNP, who was hired to complete an independent governance review. She's here today to speak to MNP's recommendations. I'm also joined by Scott Caldwell, who is the Area Manager of Transitway and Parking Services, and he manages our parking program. The Parking Strategy Refresh included a review of the Municipal Parking Management Strategy mandate, funding model, rate-setting guidelines, and our governance structure. The approach and the recommendations that we are presenting to you today are the results of the consultation with the Parking Stakeholder Consultation Group. This group consists of members of the BIAs, the community associations, and other external organizations. I'll now turn the mic over to Scott, who will go forward with the presentation.
Thank you, Lila. Chair, members of Transportation Committee, the Municipal Park Management Strategy was approved by Council in 2009. Through extensive consultation, it clarified the purpose of the paid parking program, and in doing so, it clarified the prioritization of service delivery over revenue generation. And this means that paid parking is viewed and utilized as a tool to manage parking demand issues, parking demand issues. The funding model contained within that strategy also aligns with the Municipal Act, which has general provisions related to where user fees and user fee revenues can be spent. So in this case, there's a requirement for parking fee revenues to be spent in alignment with the Municipal Park Management Strategy, and in a way so that there is a reasonable connection to parking. Lila mentioned the Parking Stakeholder Consultation Group, and this was a key outcome of the 2009 strategy. In 2009, we saw the creation of that group, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on their involvement in this refresh process in a minute. So the purpose of the strategy refresh, is to ensure that 10 years later that our mandate and our objectives and the key components of the strategy are current, and that we're able to address the key issues that have emerged over that time. A governance review was incorporated as part of the strategy refresh, primarily in response to council direction. In terms of the process, it was important to reset the mandate and arrive at provisional outcomes before embarking on the governance review. And then in terms of actually undertaking the governance review, this is where we engaged M&P to conduct that independent assessment. So as with the original strategy, consultation was a critical part of this process. Again, the consultation group served as a focus group throughout this process. Normally we meet with this group 3 or 4 times a year. From January 2018 to August of this year, we met with them a total of 10 times, walking through each step of the process. Just for reference, on the right-hand part of the slide identifies the membership of that consultation group. So there's 4 BIA representatives, 3 community association representatives, and then individual representatives from each of the remaining stakeholder groups identified. So that was not the extent of the consultation through this process, however. We did undertake in 3 public open houses, and also coordinated an online survey that was promoted through social media, and that was earlier this year. Beyond that, there were additional consultations that took place through BIAs and other external groups to complete that consultation. So as a part of the refresh, we reviewed all aspects of the strategy. We knew, however, at the outset that there would be specific things to address and resolve. First, with the mandate, 10 years later, 10 years after the original strategy was approved, we needed to ensure that the objectives and the policy statements were up to date, and ultimately if there were any substantial changes required. For the funding model, we understood there to be a desire for flexibility, considering the status of the Parking Reserve Fund and regular surpluses from parking fee revenues. So we sought that flexibility while also needing to respect the Municipal Act. For rate setting, there were a couple things that we needed to address, the first being our ability to follow through on implementing paid parking. Currently, in order to change rates at all on street or implement, and that includes the implementation of paid parking, we require concurrence from the ward councillor, the BIA, and the community association in order to proceed. And that has created some barriers along the way. Connected to that is the fact that our maximum on-street rate has been static for the last 10 plus years. Last increase was in 2008. And part of that has to do with the fact that we cannot change that rate, would not be able to increase that rate without that full concurrence. So we needed to address that through this process. And then the last bullet speaks to the our reliance on studies. So in existing paid parking areas, again, with the intent to use paid parking and rates as a tool to address issues and respond to conditions and support short-term parking for businesses and institutions and tourism. The obstacle we had was that we would base those rate change decisions on studies, which are fairly comprehensive and take a significant period of time to undertake. And the reality is that we would be able to do a study in an area and not get back to that area for a number of years. So we were looking for something that was more responsive, that would allow us to respond, to address changing conditions in each area. And then with the governance piece, as indicated, there's a desire to review, conduct a review to determine what the most appropriate governance model is. So first, with the mandate, through consultation, and starting with the parking stakeholder consultation group and continuing from there, we identified that there was broad support to continue to prioritize service delivery over revenue generation. The objectives of the program were developed early in the process through the parking stakeholder consultation group, and these were validated as we continued through the process. And the first thing that we needed to identify was, are we on the right track, or are there any significant changes required? And we arrived at these revised objectives, policy statements, with the parking stakeholder consultation group. And there were no substantial or significant changes required. There was a lot of adjustments. And what is identified on the slide is the short form wording for the objectives, and the longer, the more complete wording is available in the staff report and in the strategy document. So moving on from the funding model, from the mandate to the funding model, the strategy, the existing strategy, has defined revenues and expenses, and what that means is that on an annual basis, over the last few years, our revenues have been roughly $17.5 million, and then our operating expenses roughly $12.5 million, and there's capital costs beyond that as well. So any surplus year to year is allocated to our parking reserve fund, and that year-end balance at the end of 2018 was just under $24 million, and our average contributions over the last 3 years have been roughly $3.5 million. And to clarify, going back to the operating expenses, just over half of those expenses are actually on costs that relate to parking, but are allocated to other departments, so roads when it comes to the maintenance of on-street parking facilities, and OC Transpo for the maintenance of park and ride facilities. Those are two examples. So in addressing the funding model, we sought opportunities for additional spending that aligned with the Municipal Act and represented a direct connection to parking. Specifically, we identified opportunities for increased spending in support of sustainable modes of transportation. So that involves or includes resources to support a bike parking program, increased snow removal within paid parking areas to support mobility, as well as the potential for investment in park and ride facilities and in the development of park and ride facilities. In an effort to manage, or with the intent to manage the parking reserve fund and avoid a continually increasing balance, we have identified the need for and proposed the need for a minimum and a maximum, which will, the minimum, the intent is so that it acts as a true reserve, and there are available funds for program-related requirements as they emerge. And the maximum the intent of the maximum is to ensure that we have enough funds to cover foreseeable program costs. Any surplus at year end above the maximum, we have the ability to direct it to capital-related initiatives. So an example would be the park and ride facilities, but also life cycle spending on roads, curbs, sidewalks, specifically within paid parking areas. And there's also, we undertook a process as part of the refresh to correct the transfer that we allocate to roads for the road and sidewalk maintenance costs. In addressing rate setting issues, first, to clarify that the proposed changes within the report do not impact how we set and adjust rates at our parking facilities. We do not have the same concurrence requirements when adjusting rates at our garages and our service lots. And we have a regular process to assess and adjust those rates so that we are ensuring available short-term parking and trying to dissuade long-term parking at the same time. With respect to on-street, first off, the ability to implement paid parking. And what is being recommended is the removing the concurrence requirement that's currently within the Delegation of Authority bylaw and removing it from the BIA, Community Association, and the Ward Councillor. Any determination on a go-forward basis to implement paid parking in a new area would still be study-based with an extensive consultation process, but the recommendation on a go-forward basis could be presented to Council for approval. When we talk about it, changing existing rates, what is being proposed is a demand-based pricing model where we would collect data on a regular basis and adjust rates up and down if the parking utilization is too high or too low. And we would conduct this and review data on a zone basis. And the increments for change would be 50 cents. So this is a step in the direction of dynamic pricing, but it's important to ensure that the rates can be communicated in order to influence behavior, and this is why we've picked the increment that we have with 50 cents and gone with a zone-based model and a consistent rate within each zone. With respect to the the current on-street rate, so the majority of our spaces, the vast majority of our spaces are currently at $3 an hour, and as indicated, that has been the case since 2008. What is being proposed is increasing that hourly rate from $3 to $3.50, and that would take effect January 1st, 2020. This is catching up, as I said, more than 10 years, and if we apply inflation over those 10 years since 2008, we arrive, I believe it is at $3.55, so we're accounting for that. At the same time, what we're proposing is to identify a maximum on-street rate of $4 an hour. This does not imply that any areas will be moved to $4 an hour immediately. This is intended to give us flexibility under the demand-based pricing model to move rates up to that point if it's deemed to be warranted by virtue of the parking utilization being too high. So other outcomes from the strategy refresh, so we've revised our terms of reference for both the local area parking studies, which is a key mechanism and something that we rely on, as well as for the parking stakeholder consultation group, and this involves updates and adjustments to each of those pieces. We have identified on a go-forward basis the requirement for a technology roadmap, and this is, we'll have our first roadmap completed, we expect next spring. And this is about identifying for the various impacts and opportunities that are associated with technology. There's parking, unlike most industries, the rate of technological changes is exponential and relates to things such as data collection, payment methods, but also accounting for things such as autonomous vehicles and what impact that's going to have. And then the bike parking strategy will be developed, and this is something that we will be getting underway with on the heels of tabling this. And that is, the development of bike parking strategy is a key part of our path forward, and it's intended to better coordinate and clarify bike parking requirements, identifying what is installed, where and when. And the timing for that, we expect to have that completed in 2020. So at this point in time, I will now hand the things over to Sydney Franklin with MNP to discuss the governance review.
Thanks. Good morning. So as you heard earlier, in December of 2018, Council directed staff to explore and evaluate the options around a governance model, and MNP, which I represent here today, was engaged to undertake an independent governance review. So today I'm going to present three quick pieces in summary of our governance review. Those are the process that we undertook, an overview of the three governance model options that we developed, and the outcomes of the evaluation of those governance models and possible integration options within. The first thing that we did was define options that were based on a jurisdictional review, best practices, and information that was reviewed provided by the city. We then established a set of 11 criteria that were built upon the outcomes of the MPMS and the desired governance model going forward for that. And then based upon that, we engaged in an evaluation that ranked against those 11 established criteria each of the 3 options that we developed. And further, we added, in addition to that, a full sort of examination of the elements within, as well as the ranking as a score. And then we arrived at a recommended model. From that recommended model, we then engaged in a review of integration options. There were 2 that were developed, and then refined the outcomes based on those. In terms of the 3 options, option 1 is essentially a modified status quo, is another way of referring to this. And the greatest change here is that it implies that all of the recommendations presented in the MPMS updates are adopted. The greatest thing that does in terms of some of the changes in terms of what we define as modified, is that it removes the concurrence requirement around the parking services, that thereby create more independence and change the ranking thereby. Option 2 is similar to option 1, but the accountability and oversight related to parking services then falls under a board of directors, as opposed to city, which it is in option 1. Both options 1 and 2 still fall within the Municipal Act constraints. And then when we look at option 3, that is a separate corporation, which thereby moves the parking services under the oversight and accountability of that separate arm's length corporation structure. And it also thereby removes that municipal service corporation from the constraints of the Municipal Act. After the evaluation that we conducted against those 11 criteria and the further examination therein, we discovered we recommend that option 1 is the model that be taken going forward. And essentially that is because it has the highest ranking and it fits best within the business case for that particular option, which I'll go into a little bit further in the next slide, which speaks about our outcomes. So against the criteria that we developed, option 1 and 2 ranked quite similarly. The key difference is that the benefits that option 2 presents do not warrant the cost of the change, and that's a cost in terms of both direct costs, monetary costs, and work effort involved in terms of the transition to a separate board structure. Option 3 was the least aligned with the MPMS, and in particular around 3 areas of the criteria that were most highly weighted when we went out to stakeholders to get their input, which are transparency and accountability, as well as the focus on service delivery over revenue maximization. Further, it provides the least control by city as to what then occurs within parking services. So from there, we did actually examine the integration scenarios, and again, there were 2 around both options 1 and 2 because they were similarly ranked to see if there was a difference therein. The 2 scenarios in terms of integration are A, an as-is scenario, so keeping parking services and enforcement services separate, and B, which is integrating parking services and enforcement services. The reason for the consideration of these 2 service areas is that they have the greatest degree of alignment in terms of functional, in terms of the functions that they perform. There are actually 5 different areas within MPMS and MPMP and thereby MPMS that have alignment, but the greatest fall within enforcement and parking services. The conclusion of the investigation into the integration scenarios is that the business case supports adopting, as we found, governance model 1, which is the modified municipal service delivery model, and thereby supports the scenario A, the as-is scenario where enforcement and parking services are kept separate, again, because it has the strongest business case in terms of the degree of change and cost and the benefit that's involved. So the greatest benefit with the least degree of disruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentations. We do have a number of speakers on the list, but just before the speakers come, I'm going to introduce a motion to help set the context and maybe help the speakers understand or help them with their presentation. Whereas, as part of the refresh of the municipal parking management strategy, staff recommends that council establish a $20 million maximum balance for the city's parking reserve fund to ensure the fund does not grow beyond forecasted requirements. And whereas the 2018 balance in the parking reserve fund was $24 million and is forecast to be close to that amount for 2019, and whereas staff is also recommending that any amount in the parking reserve fund in excess of the maximum be contributed to city capital accounts related to MPMS objectives as follows: park and ride lots, acquisition, development, expansion, and curb, sidewalk, and parking lane life cycle costs in paid parking areas. And whereas staff has advised that there are projects currently underway that would be eligible to receive those surplus funds, and the application of the parking reserve funds to eligible projects would result in the return of an equivalent amount to the citywide reserve fund. And whereas in response to council direction, staff is bringing forward a recommended strategic road safety action plan for committee and council consideration later in 2019. And whereas the strategic road safety action plan report will recommend priority road safety investments over 5 years based on Vision Zero principles and funded from the growth in automated enforcement revenues, red light cameras, speed cameras, school bus violation cameras, and the like. And whereas there is expected to be a gap in time and funding between the council adoption of the Strategic Road Safety Action Plan and the anticipated growth in revenues from automated enforcement measures, and council will want to implement its Vision Zero action plan as soon as possible following the adoption of the plan. Therefore, be it resolved, the Transportation Committee recommend that City Council approve that the excess funds in the Parking Reserve Fund, expected to be approximately $4 million, be applied to eligible works in progress as described in this motion, and that the amounts returned to the citywide reserve be used to establish baseline funding for the Strategic Road Safety Action Plan for consideration in the draft 2020 capital budget. So effectively, we have a road safety action plan that is coming forward. It will make several recommendations and will be very expensive. The revenues to fund those programs will take some time to come in because they're coming from automated enforcement, which we're rolling out over a number of years. And to ensure that we can fund those important projects, we'll use the reserve that is returned to the accounts to accelerate the financing of that program, which will come to committee later this year. And so with that, we'll go to speakers. Our first speaker is Denis Van Staldunen, or Dennis, perhaps? Dennis, I'm sorry.
Good morning. Now. Good morning, councillors. I would like to speak today to the Municipal Parking Management Strategy Refresh, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Wellington West Business Improvement Area. And are my slides going to be coming up? Sorry. Because there's some good ones. I don't want you to miss those. Okay, great, thank you. Right arrow. There we go. I'm getting a sense of deja vu today appearing before you because the last time I was here speaking to Transportation Committee was in 2008, speaking to almost exactly the same topic and asking for you to make some additional considerations. In 2008, in 2007 into 2008, paid parking was being recommended for Hintonburg specifically as the result of a deeply flawed and badly executed parking study that was done at that time, and it became very clear and very quickly, and actually the city manager, Kent Kirkpatrick, admitted this to us and apologized to us afterwards, that revenues were what were driving parking decisions at the City of Ottawa. And we objected to that, and we said, Hintonburg right now is going through a very economically depressed time, and we're about to face a road reconstruction 1 year from now, and at that time they would have installed physical parking meters 1 year before a road reconstruction. So we said it's clearly not the time, clearly there's no strategy for dealing with this, not now, not in Hintonburg. The second thing that we said at that time was we wanted some sort of municipal parking management strategy, and you can see from the slide that I pulled up in 2008, I was asking specifically, or we were asking for that, for a citywide planning strategy that took into account service delivery, not revenue. And I would like to say thank you to the council as a whole for actually taking action on that, and certainly Kent Kirkpatrick promised us at that time, and he delivered on that. That took us from Parking Management Strategy 1.0, that is revenue, to Parking Management 2.0, which focused on service delivery over revenue, which was a marked improvement, and we did appreciate it, very much so. Now, before I go any further, I just want to get a couple of things off the table here right off the bat. Just as in 2008, we are not here arguing against paid parking in Wellington West. At that time in 2008, we were saying, not now, not this way. And today we're saying, paid parking is coming, and although many of my members would like me to say, no, 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 never, 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 we understand that it's part of the municipal strategy and that it's going to be coming to our neighborhood. So I'm not here to say no to it. I'm also not asking for a veto. We never really asked for that. That was actually a good intention that was built into the previous parking management strategy. And of course, in the last time a study came forward, we took advantage of that, and we said, not now, give us some more time. We understand that that was never tenable and that that needs to disappear. I have a suggested alternative. I think we went too far with that. We're asking to continue our partnership. Really quickly, though, I do want to say that while we got to 2.0 with the municipal parking strategy that we have, that we had in that time, and I think there are some efforts to improve that, I'd like to see us talking more about municipal parking strategy 3.0. I think the current proposal gets us to about 2.1 or 2.2 version. I'd like to get to 3.0. And the principles for 3.0 are in the giant book of paid parking strategy by Donald Shoup in 2011. And he recommends three strategies or three principles. First, to have a successful paid parking program, charge fair market prices for curb parking in a flexible and dynamic way that responds to supply and demand, so that higher demand parking is charged higher, lower demand is charged lower. Second, and this is an important one that actually I think is not being addressed in this plan, return resulting revenue in a significant way to the neighborhoods that generate it, so that we, the business improvement areas that are being asked to absorb paid parking, become your biggest champions so that we can actually help you carry it forward. That's a worldwide principle. There are chapters and chapters of great examples of where that has created not just more acceptance, but has led to creative thinking and much more sort of innovative results. And then the third one is about planning, and I'll leave that to another committee here of council. But the ultimate bottom line and the principle that should be guiding 3.0 parking management strategy in this city is not service delivery over revenue generation. We've got that. We're done with that. The real 3.0 principle is from Donald Shoup's book, which is subsidize people and places and think about parking as an integrated part of neighborhood building. Don't think about it as a way to store cars and manage the flow of cars. It does that, but if you're thinking about it in a broader way, you're going to be doing much, much more than that, and there's a much bigger opportunity. So in terms of what's being proposed today and what's in the motion, we support the idea of charging fair market prices for curb parking, and we see some movement in that direction with the 50-cent increments up and down and the rest of it. And so kudos to your team, Scott, for moving towards that. But what we'd really like to see much more of is, first of all, technology, invest in the next generation of technology, and we're willing to be your pilot guinea pigs to make sure it's much more dynamic and flexible. Secondly, minimum introductory pricing when paid parking is integrated into an area. Set an absolute minimum at-cost price for a period of time when it's integrated into a new neighborhood, A, to encourage more acceptance and to give me a marketing tool, but more importantly, to generate real data without putting the threshold of a high-priced paid parking being integrated in an area, so that for a period of time we can get as much data as possible and set the rates where they belong before we introduce the higher threshold.
Thank you very much.
Oh, are we?
I
Yep.
gave you 90 seconds more than...
90 seconds more? Okay, I'll do what I can here.
No, I've already done that.
Oh, you've already done
Already
that?
gave you 90
Okay,
seconds more.
all right.
We do have a question from Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Dennis, and great presentation. The staff report would expand the BIA grant. Is that a positive development in your view?
That was on the next slide,
Really?
Councillor. Yes. I think, no, I totally support the idea of offering more revenue to BIAs. The mechanism of the grant, though, I think is a little restrictive, and it's a little arbitrary in terms of saying it's a $10,000 grant. The two principles that I was going to mention in the next slide were what we'd like to see more of is dramatically expand the amount and a level of funding available to local areas, and put it under their control what that's going to be applied to. I understand there are restrictions in the Municipal Act under the current governance structure, and I think that was done a little bit backwards. I'd be happy to talk about that as well. But the other one is just that if there's going to be funding available, it has to be scalable to the area that it's being applied to. Wellington West, once we get paid parking, is, I'm almost certain, going to have more paid parking spaces than any other neighborhood in Ottawa, because we have a 2.5 kilometer linear main street, larger than any other main street in downtown Ottawa, and we also have a vertical going up to Scott and down to the Queensway, so Holland, Parkdale, Gladstone, Byron, Scott Street. Any paid parking that's applied in any of those areas is going to be there. So if we want to actually do any kinds of programs like snow clearing or sort of wayfinding, we're thinking about a much larger area, and our costs are going to be higher than, say, Somerset Village, which is one block.
So your assertion would be that the grant should be proportionally allocated according to the number of parking spots?
Yeah, I would say that if the grant is the only thing being offered, that would be appropriate. I would say that the envelope should be much larger, and there should be a much larger and more significant mechanism that we can apply to things like streetscaping, beautification, to other improvements in the area. And the proposal as presented on the screen here was suggesting that the excess revenues from the reserve fund be applied to road safety and the upcoming road safety strategy. And I think that is a wonderful goal, and you need funding for that. But if I compare the direct benefit to a neighborhood in terms of economic development, in terms of beautification, in terms of making the neighborhood a more attractive place for customers to come to offset whatever customers wouldn't be coming because of paid parking, that's a much more direct benefit and a much more direct application of the funding. Suburban parking lots for park and rides, I can see vague benefits coming from that to us. A couple cars less coming into the downtown core, but it's not a direct benefit to the neighborhood, and it doesn't stand up to that principle of local benefit.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you, Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Dennis.
Thank you.
Very good to hear from you about this. I just have a couple quick questions. Are you on the parking stakeholder consultation group as one of the BIA representatives?
I am not. My predecessor was not on it, so I did not inherit his seat when I took
Okay,
over.
well, that should change. I don't know if is that group continuing past this period of time now, or just a question to staff, I guess?
Chair, the Parking Stakeholder Consultation Group will persist, and it is part of the strategy that we're putting forward. We select or identify a new membership to coincide with the term of council. We've let this one lapse to conclude with this process. So following this, we will be identifying a new membership. We have 4 BIA representatives, and we typically engage with Ecobia, and they identify which 4 BIA representatives they would like to fill those seats.
Okay. I just strongly encourage people that are on that to have the knowledge necessary and that do the type of reading that we're hearing today and the type of research that's been done. So just strongly encourage that a representative like Dennis be on there. In terms of your comment around the funding that is produced in local communities stays in local communities, there is an objective that talks about prioritizing short-term parking that responsibly priced to businesses, institutions, and tourism. Presumably, it would make sense to add local communities into that objective as well. I assume you mean that this would be looked at as part of the community association, other local representatives in the group, not just the businesses in the area, but actually the wider community. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, the improvement of the neighborhood is a benefit to everyone in the neighborhood. In the book, he talks about the ideal recipient of these funds, though, and manager of the funds would be an organization like a business improvement area or business improvement district, because we have the staff and the mandates to and the funding mechanism with the city to carry that out. And we would do that in consultation with our local stakeholders. But you have a municipal board, a local board of the municipality in that area whose job it is to improve the streetscape and make the experience better for all visitors. And that is a business improvement area, and that would be the ideal place for that funding to be.
Okay, but you wouldn't oppose
directed.
local communities also having a say or a discussion about where that
Absolutely.
funding goes?
Oh, and they have a say in everything we do as well, so.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I guess the last question I have for you is around how you see parking associated with congestion. So parking rates and congestion, and how we reduce congestion in our core area.
Yep.
Whether that be things like low or free cost transit through different downtown areas, which has been implemented in other cities, or whether that be through things like parking on demand, as you're saying. What is your view from a BIA perspective of congestion in our areas and how that may contribute or not contribute to revenues of your membership?
Sure, yeah. That's there's a 2.0 answer and a 3.0 answer. The parking management as a service answer is managing parking means people are circling the block less, they're getting to their parking spaces sooner. It manages congestion in a mechanical way to improve the situation locally. The 3.0 way, though, is to think much more transformatively about how those funds could be applied to easing parking more directly. So, I mean, if you asked me, would you prefer to be spending that money on a park and ride in the suburbs or offsetting bus fares, for example, I would see a much more direct benefit in my neighborhood from the bus fares than from the park and ride, because it would more directly benefit more people and get them out of their cars. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Dudas.
So I have 2 aspects of a question I want to ask you. So in terms of LRT, what's your proximity for your BIA in terms of the closest LRT station or slate stations?
There are two LRT stations currently adjacent to our area, and there's a third Gladstone station that will be added. Bayview Station is about 200 meters from the edge of the BIA, and the Tunney's Pasture Station is about 300 meters from Spencer, which is the farthest we go on Holland. We'd like to change that eventually to take our boundaries right to the LRT stations so that we're completely adjacent. But for most people getting off at Tunney's Pasture, it's going to be a 7-8 minute walk from the station to our main street.
Have you been marketing that in terms of internal, like citywide tourism and tourism that's coming from other areas? to promote your businesses? Like, I'm just wondering if that walkability has improved your business opportunities?
I can only speak for the last couple of weeks. But yes, we have started to, and we are planning to. But for example, we had our Taste of Wellington West Festival on September 21st. We saw record numbers of people coming from outside the area. We had sort of anecdotal reports of crowds of people walking up Wellington towards the festival. And so those are cars that never came into the area in the first place, and that's really what we would want to encourage for sure.
So while we're looking at changing in terms of parking, there are opening opportunities in terms of transit for businesses in Wellington West and other areas of the city.
Yes.
And also with Stage 2 as well. So I'd certainly encourage you to look at maybe those opportunities in terms of advertising, things
Absolutely.
like that.
Yep.
And then to my other question, you referenced new technology and the offer to be a test bed. Can you give us an example of some of the technology that you'd be proposing to test?
I only know what I've read about, and I'm not a technical expert on any of these things, but certainly the use of sensors, the use of sort of smarter meters to judge whether spaces around them are empty or full. There's a lot of different ways of doing it, sort of overhead cameras, all the rest of it. That's not my area of expertise, but what I do know is that I'm reading about lots and lots of people with lots of good ideas and lots of cities trying things to be more responsive, and that's really, if we can just keep focusing on moving the bar forward rather than treating kind of our status quo technology as the limiting factor to how we're building our parking strategy, we'd like to see that.
As you know, city budgets are incredibly tight. Would that be something that you think that your businesses or businesses potentially across the city would be willing to partner in terms of financial opportunities to look at those technologies?
I think that one of the problems that the municipal parking management strategy is trying to solve is that you are going to have too much money coming in for the cap that you have, and you're looking for opportunities to invest, and parking management is the ideal place under the Municipal Act for you to invest that. So my ask would be that you invest that money in those technologies. My businesses are not going to be happy about paid parking coming, many of them, so asking them to invest in the technology that will bring paid parking, I don't think that's going to be a hallelujah moment for anyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kathleen Fortin with the Healthy Transportation Coalition. Also, Councillor Fleury has a motion he'd like to introduce as well, just as before, guide the conversation. We'll deal with both motions after the delegations.
Mr. Chair, you want me to read it? So this relates to the governance review. Whereas the current mandate of the Municipal Parking Management Program works on a cost recovery model with surplus revenues of up to $23 million, can only be invested in the Municipal Parking Management Program for future capital and operational investments. Whereas the city asked MNP Limited to provide an independent governance review of parking operations, including preparing a business case on the available governance options to review the current model. Whereas the governance review report, as presented by MNP Limited, recommends maintaining the current governance structure as the best align with the city's new MPMS, the Modified Municipal Delivery, a city program that will deliver parking services under a non-for-profit, self-sustaining model and direct surplus revenue to funds transportation-related activities in alignment with the MPMS and the Parking Reserve Fund, whereas parking revenue is not used to benefit the whole city or council's priorities, whereas Hydro Ottawa has demonstrated the value and returns for a dividend to the city, where City Council can define where it's best allocated. Therefore, be it resolved that the Transportation Committee recommend an additional option, or option number 3 as per the report, whereby a for-profit is used to collect all parking revenue in a similar delivery model system as Hydro Ottawa, also known as option 3, to be reviewed and developed, and further be it resolved that revenue collected can be reverted back to the city in form of a dividend to be allocated to general revenue or council set priorities.
Thank you very much, Councillor. We have lost quorum around the table. Mr. Clerk, can we continue with, Councillor El Shantari, thank you.
I have a quick question about a motion.
Let's just make sure they're sitting around the table. Sorry, about your motion or about Matt's
Yeah, I
motion?
have like a potential motion for a slight change to an objective. Just to add 2 words.
Yeah, let's,
Want me to wait for
let's get through the public stuff first. Okay, thank you, Ms. Fortin. Thanks very much. You know the rules. I'll give you a hand signal when you're getting close to your time.
Okay.
Okay.
So my name is Kathleen Fortin, and I'm a member of the Healthy Transportation Coalition and Ottawa Acorn. And I'm here today because I believe that paid parking revenue would be best be spent on improving the snow clearing standards on sidewalks. Use this revenue to bring winter sidewalk maintenance to a 1A standard. This is a great opportunity for the city to make getting around more accessible. The winter sidewalk conditions have a direct impact on me because I am disabled and I have a condition that makes it difficult for me to go out during bad weather with my walker or my power wheelchair. I can't go to my appointments or go shopping. Especially challenging is when I can't go out and do community work. This has a huge impact on my well-being. It makes me feel isolated and like a second-class citizen. One winter, I got stuck in an ice rut in the center of my street because there was so much ice. I got stuck between a flat surface of the pavement that had no ice, and I had to get a neighbor to come out and assist me. I had to get out of my chair to reposition it. If no one comes along for help, you're waiting for who knows how long and are at the mercy of others. It feels like I'm being controlled by the city who tells me what I can and cannot do. People in cars have a lot more freedom. The rest of us have to plan our outings the day before. In the past, to try and address this situation, I have tried calling the city hotline for snow removal, asking them, when is my street going to be cleared? I couldn't get a direct answer because there is a standard procedure for when things get cleared, but this procedure clearly doesn't prioritize sidewalks. They said it could take anywhere from 3 to 4 days, and you just can't wait that long. It can be depressing and make you feel defeated if you don't get out for 3 or 4 days. How do you feel? We have to rely on neighbors, and nobody wants to be a burden or rely on anyone else. I have a lot of friends who have disabilities as well, who are also affected by poor snow and ice clearing off sidewalks. The city is overlooking all of our needs. When my friends who use electric wheelchairs try to navigate their way down sidewalks, they slide all over the place and risk hitting or being hit by other vehicles on the road. People go on the road because they can't use the sidewalks or don't know where the sidewalk even is. That's part of the problem. It's gotten to the point where people can't even leave their house because of the conditions of the sidewalks. The city needs to prioritize making sidewalks safe and accessible for everyone. Last year, the winter was just terrible, and the city did nothing to clear the sidewalks. If we don't address the snow and ice clearing issue now, instead of over the next couple of years, we risk increased injuries. People will be incapacitated. There will be continued isolation and abandonment and increased costs on many levels. It angers me to know this continues to be overlooked by the city. They're telling us we're not important and our access to transportation comes second to people in cars. My asks and demands. Paid parking revenue should be used to help address these inequities. This can be done by bringing snow clearing standards of all sidewalks to a Class 1A standard as in bare surfaces by committing $7 million a year to winter sidewalk maintenance. By taking an equitable approach to snow clearing, redevelop the snow clearing schedule to prioritize sidewalk clearing over road clearing and prioritize the mobility of Ottawa's most vulnerable residents. Finally, by conducting a cost-benefit analysis of the costs incurred from injury and accident liabilities compared to how much it would cost to bring winter sidewalk maintenance to a Class 1A standard. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You were almost exactly at 5 minutes, so it was very well written and well planned. Would staff comment on what we're doing vis-a-vis sidewalk snow clearing as part of this report, and then also perhaps give us a preview of next month very quickly?
Certainly. Thank you for bringing your concerns forward. It may not fall within the municipal parking management strategy, but Road Services is currently going through a service delivery review for this upcoming winter, and we will be coming back to committee in November, and sidewalk maintenance is one of the main topics that we are reviewing through this service delivery review. We're also going through a maintenance quality standard refresh starting in 2020, which again is going to bring this to the forefront. So I do assure you that we are looking at ways that we can better the maintenance, winter maintenance on our sidewalks as we move forward. So I hope you join us in November when we come back to committee with those results.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you. Our next speaker is Trevor Hache.
Good morning, Chair Blais and members of the Transportation Committee. I just wanted to start by indicating that I live in Canada South. I'm on the board of the Healthy Transportation Coalition, but I'm speaking today as an individual resident of Ottawa. We support the proposal to increase parking rates, but we would really like the city to increase them much more quickly and to a greater extent. To achieve greater policy consistency, the city should commit to increase parking rates by a minimum of 2.5% every year, as is the plan for transit fares. It's important to recognize that on-street metered 1- and 2-hour parking rates have been frozen since 2008. Scott mentioned this in his presentation, the staff presentation today. Over that same period of time, 80% is the rate at which transit fares have increased. These facts contradict the city's stated policy objectives, which include wanting to encourage people to ride transit more often and drive private automobiles less often. We also want to voice support for the motion that was presented today to invest in safe roads that don't have design failings in them that lead to people being killed. So certainly Vision Zero is an important goal. And we, just saw the motion today for the first time, but we're supportive of that, and I'll also have some remarks in support of Councillor Fleury's motion today, too. We certainly support the use of parking revenue to remove snow and ice off of sidewalks one more time throughout the winter. If I understand what staff are saying correctly, it will mean that snow will be removed from the sidewalks entirely once more often than would otherwise be the case. Though we do feel this is inadequate and that more use of parking revenue should be used this winter. We're talking about November. There could be snow on the ground in November. We need to see better sidewalks this winter. Obviously, many people with mobility challenges and frankly, many able-bodied people found the sidewalks to be in a very terrible state last year. We know that increasing the winter Maintenance standards would improve things, and we know that that takes money, and parking revenue could be used to support that better snow clearing of our sidewalks. And we would encourage the city to increase parking rates to do that. We support the use of parking revenue to install more bike parking throughout the city. We also support the proposal to hire a few more staff to help coordinate this bike parking. In 2017, we worked with Councillor Eglai to encourage the use of $30,000 in parking revenue to fund the installation of ring and post bike parking at bus stops. And that was funded as part of Budget 2018 decision-making. We then worked earlier this year with Councillor Menard, and he got support from staff for the idea that this $30,000 should be repeated in 2019 to secure more bike parking spots at bus stops. So this is one of the good things that parking revenue can be used for, to encourage residents of Ottawa to align with the city's stated policy objectives, which is to try to shift people toward more sustainable modes of transportation. The city should explore paying for bike parking for a bike sharing program within bike parking areas using parking revenue. Ottawa doesn't currently have a functioning bike sharing program, sadly. Councillor Fleury's motion would allow for a dividend to be paid for the city. Perhaps the city would desire to use some of that dividend toward reestablishing a bike sharing program. I can't for the life of me understand the rationale for providing free parking at municipal lots and in on-street paid parking areas on many evenings and weekends. This is a photo one Sunday morning recently. There's a lot of free parking in Ottawa in municipal lots. I would urge the city to end free parking on evenings and weekends. We know that there's consideration given to the fact that, well, you know, this sort of policy supports businesses, but we don't charge, no charge transit use on Sundays and evenings, so I don't know why we do a no-charge approach to parking on Sundays and evenings. It seems contradictory to the city's stated policy objectives. We'd also like to support the removal of the veto, aka concurrence requirement that community associations and BIAs have been receiving in Wellington West and Hintonburg. We want these areas to start charging parking before the end of June 2020 at the very latest. Parking should also be charged in Old Ottawa South, where it is not currently being charged in some areas. The city should also consider charging $1 a day for people to park at park and ride facilities to help cover the cost of ongoing repairs of those facilities, to help cover the clearing of snow of those park and ride facilities. Perhaps if the city were spending less of that money and collecting zero user fees in that area and moved toward a way where they were collecting at least $1 a day from people parking there, the sidewalks could be cleared of snow better. Very finally, my last suggestion is that we'd like to see the city strongly consider creating an arm's-length agency similar to Hydro Ottawa, where a dividend could be paid and the city could use those funds in support of sustainable modes of transportation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chair Blake. So on the private parking fees, sort of you're looking for a small fee in private parking areas that could then help go towards municipally managed areas there, like snow clearing in front of the sidewalk. Is that the suggestion?
Well, certainly we know there is a lot of free parking to be had in suburban areas of Ottawa and some very urban areas of Ottawa throughout the course of the week. I know in the mobility question that was asked related to the official plan, there was a question put to people filling out a survey whether they'd be supportive of a small fee being applied to privately run parking lots. So, you know, I live close to the Canada Centrum. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of free parking spots there all the time. I think if the city is to, you know, want to really achieve its objective of reducing private automobile use, that, you know, free parking should come to an end. So I wasn't totally sure on your question,
but I understand what you're saying now. It's the parking lots that are currently free in front of malls, things like that. There would be a potential fee that could be remitted to the city for maintaining, for allowing that amount of parking.
We'd love to see that, but also, you know, we'd love to see the city stop providing free parking in municipally owned parking facilities, evenings, weekends.
Right, okay. I just wanted to clarify, because there's some paid parking now in the downtown core, for example, that are private parking lots. It's not the suggestion isn't as much on that side, it is on these other, okay.
Well, certainly, we'd love to see the parking fees increased in the private lots as well. So if there's anything that could be done within the municipal tax structure, for example, property taxes, for example, could be increased on, privately run parking lots. I don't know the municipal act inside and out, so I don't know what the requirements are related to that, but certainly we think parking rates should be increased to encourage people to ride transit more often.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor El-Chantiry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, did I hear you right say we should charge for the park and ride $1 for cars to park in a park and ride? Is that what
What I'm suggesting is that we recognize that constructing those park and ride lots, which I personally have taken advantage of many times, costs a lot of money. We know in Canada North, for example, Ottawa Citizen published an article at one point that indicated that each parking spot being constructed cost tens of thousands of dollars because of the cost of the land and then the work that had to be done to build the parking lot. So there's also costs related to the removal of snow from park and ride facilities. $1 a day to park there would be probably the least expensive parking in the entire city. In terms of somewhere where parking is charged. So just in terms of collecting a very, very small user fee to help offset some of the costs that the city's incurring, I don't think it would be unreasonable. I know there needs to be a balance between wanting to encourage people to park and then ride transit. I don't think $1 would deter many people. $1 a day, it's very minimal.
But I thought all along we want people to park so there'll be less people on our road, and the repair on road will cost a lot more than have them parked there for the duration, and you'll have those number of thousands of cars off your road. So I thought environmentally, and it's a cleaner air if you don't have as many cars on the road, but suggest to charge $1. And what about if the charging $1 deter people from parking and the park and ride, and they start driving their car? Is that a win or is it a lose?
I'd personally not be deterred by $1. I personally would find it reasonable in recognition of the fact that those lots cost something to build in the first place and to repair and remove snow from. So personally, I'd be okay paying $1.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kavanagh, did you have a question or no?
Thank you very much. I was intrigued by your idea about the bike sharing in terms of it. Is it possible to ask the city for their comment on that, for the staff? Because I would be interested to know, because we did lose the bike sharing program, and that could help a lot if people were parking and there was a cycle program that they could use instead. I could certainly see that in places in my area. For example, we have D&D struggling with parking, but I think if people had more options, that might be something they could do.
Chair, we'll ask VVG to come up and comment on that, please.
Councillor, if you could just repeat that, because I had a conversation at the back.
It was in regards to bike sharing programs and integrating them in with parking. The idea that if we had more bike sharing, people could park further away. We're already experimenting on that, and this idea was raised, so that people had another option, so that they can do that last bit on a bike. Having bike sharing programs, having it integrated into our parking strategy.
We could, but the bike sharing program is something that is part of the TMP. We encouraged it, and unfortunately there were no operators that wanted to take that on. So until we get the bike share service provider come in, and the past had always been focused around the downtown, but you're speaking about further away and rolling it in with the parking. It's an issue maybe that we can continue.
Yeah, it could be anywhere. I'm just giving an example.
Yeah. So it is something that we will have to revisit in the TMP, how we can encourage that, and we would work with our colleagues here to roll it in. But we have the TMP update. It's just underway right now.
But could it be paid for under, we have revenue under parking, so, and then there is a correlation.
Chair, with the pending bike parking strategy coming, that is something that we've considered rolling into the scope of that to consider the operational impacts and how those would be potentially accommodated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Leeper had a question.
Thanks, and just arising out of Mr. Hache's delegation, I just want to make sure that we're proceeding along, on solid grounds here. With respect to charging $1 per day for a park and ride, that is legitimately asserted as a potential benefit, but that would add some really significant revenues back into the parking revenues, right?
Correct. Those would be considered parking fee revenues. The parking program funds the maintenance of the park and rides. But on the flip side, we also receive the revenues from what are currently Gold Pass. So the assumption would be that any per vehicle charge would follow the same path.
So when you're increasing the revenues, those are tied to the parking expenses. We don't want to have a surplus that keeps going over $20 million if that is the cap that we end up. Could one of the perverse effects of charging for park and ride parking be to result in a reduction in other parking in order to keep a balance between parking expenses and revenues?
Chair, from a policy perspective, and in managing the park and rides and the rates that get charged, I will defer to my colleagues, and maybe defer to Vivi again on that. Currently, we operate within a surplus, and we endeavor to allocate that surplus through the Park Reserve Fund and through the surplus of the Park Reserve Fund to things such as park and ride. So we will achieve that balance and find places to spend that, and that's one of the key purposes of the strategy here is to identify those funding sources.
But as money comes into the reserve, and then we go over the $20 million cap, we need to spend it. It could only be spent on parking-related stuff.
Chair, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next delegation is Mr. Alex Cullen. Thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. Cullen. I'll try to give you a wave when you've got 15 or 20 seconds left.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Alex Cullen. I'm here representing the Federation of Citizens Associations. You are familiar with the FCA. We represent some 51 community associations in the City of Ottawa. And we are here because we have participated in the Municipal Parking Management Strategy Refresh exercise, and we're here in support of the recommendations that are found in the report. Specifically, the new procedure for determining new pay and display areas. We think using evidence-based studies through the local area parking study and having those studies come to this committee, which allows for public consultation, is superior to the former system that allows for a veto for community associations, BIAs, and the ward councillor. So even our groups are prepared to give up that veto. We also support the increase in the parking rates. It's been noted it's the first increase since 2008. We are particularly enthused, Mr. Chairman, that the use of these revenues to support sustainable modes of transportation. This is one of the objectives that you find in the municipal parking management strategy, that it is to support sustainable modes of transportation such as walking, cycling, and transit. We are particularly enthused, Mr. Chairman, to read in the report that while some of the funds may go to parking strategy, bike parking strategy and park and ride facilities, that there'll be additional snow clearance in the pay and display areas. As a matter of fact, that's an argument to extend pay and display because we would get better snow clearing service. So that is something that we think should be pursued, and we're glad to see it in the report. We also support the increase in parking rates as a means of meeting the Transportation Master Plan goals. This falls under the rubric of traffic demand management. Clearly, if we are to increase walking in this city, if we're to increase cycling, if we're to increase transit use, you do want to discourage automobile use, and what goes into the decision-making for drivers of vehicles is parking costs. So clearly, this is a tool that's in the traffic demand management kit. We hope to see a review of all those tools in the TMP, but we support this parking increase because we think that is consistent with your TMP goals. With respect to the governance review, we support the recommendation in the report for a municipal delivery model. That's option 1. We find that that particular option is more accessible to community groups as opposed to option 3. Option 3, there are other complications we'll hit on in a moment, but you're accessible here. We don't know how accessible a Hydro Ottawa model would be to citizens. Right now, Hydro Ottawa is not very accessible to the citizens of Ottawa, by the way. As also an issue of accountability. You are responsible for parking on our streets that we pay for. We can talk to you about it. It's not so much the same thing with the Hydro Ottawa model. The last thing that you should consider is you are approving a model here that has new procedure for determining new pay and display areas, a new procedure in determining the rate increase, new procedure in determining the parking reserve fund. If you go to a Hydro Ottawa model, you do not have that control. So we will prefer the report that's been presented by staff. They did the independent review. You heard the consultant about the independent review. You may want to question the consultant on that, but we do support the municipal delivery model. So, Mr. Chairman, we're here in support of the report before you. We look forward to more opportunities to use those parking revenues to support sustainable modes of transportation. That's within the confines of the Municipal Act, but we think this is a great first step, and we look forward to more steps along this direction. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cullen. You had a whole minute left.
A minute left. I should bank it. Really, I should.
Councillor Menard would like to ask you a question.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for coming, Mr. Cullen. I'm wondering just about your comment about the municipal service delivery model versus, say, a Hydro Ottawa type of model. You saw the difference in the flexibility that would be presented there for where funds could be spent as a result of collection of parking fares. And then the Municipal Act talks about the alignment with the municipal parking management strategy, or there needs to be a reasonable connection specifically with parking. So what is your interpretation that, in fact, under Model 1, the delivery service model, that in fact we do have some flexibility to be spending on other sustainable modes of transportation as a relationship with parking exists?
Yes, quite frankly, I think staff have outlined it very clearly. You're going to be getting a bike parking strategy if you approve this report. You're encouraging bike use throughout the city. And I might point out to you that the use of these funds, even though they are generated by a geographic area, everyone in Ottawa, or 80% of the households in Ottawa, have a car and visit these areas. So these funds are public funds being generated by the residents of Ottawa. And reinvesting those funds in those sustainable modes of transportation, just simply being able to open your car door and be able to step on a clean sidewalk and not go over a snowbank. Our members really like that. But bike parking is another element. The parking rides are another element. You're extending LRT out to LRT 2, and then eventually LRT 3. The opportunities for park and ride are there. So we think that even though the dividend model, which Hydro Ottawa has, says you could use the money everywhere, anywhere, what we're talking about in terms of sustainable modes of transportation would eat up these funds anyway. There's lots of opportunity. And might I remind you that the dividends that come from Hydro Ottawa go into general revenues. Where would the dividends from this corporation go?
Okay, that's helpful. And you are aware we have had an expanding model of where the parking revenues can go. It wasn't always as flexible as
Yes,
things like park and rides for transit.
I'd like to thank legal
where we're heading.
for joining the 21st century.
Okay, very good on that. I guess I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Leeper has some questions.
Thanks, and I think your presentation, Mr. Cullen, was really well put with respect to the advantages and the disadvantages of having a third-party corporate entity. And I just want to make sure, because if we did create an MSC, and Councillor Furry's motion puts that firmly on the table today to go down that path, we'd have flexibility to spend $2 or $3 million dividend every year on whatever council's priorities are. We could purchase 3 electric buses every year. We could build a new park every year. Why does the FCA consider that having that full flexibility to spend that dividend on council's priorities every year is not the appropriate path to go down?
Councillor, there are 2 aspects. One is we like the ability to approach the people who are responsible for the municipal parking in the city through the situation that we have today, accessibility. So that's a very important issue. When we're able to raise parking concerns in our community, we've got someplace to go to as public, and that we can hold people accountable. Can't do that with a corporation. Secondly, you have the taxation system to meet the general needs, but the FCA is looking at the parking regime as part of traffic demand management, consistent with promoting the goals of the TMP. We see that the funds are there available to promote the things we hold dear. Vision Zero, by the way, the road safety motion that's coming forward, we think that's fantastic, and the use of those monies for that. And parking reserve and the parking revenues can't cover everything, but the fact that it can deal with Vision Zero, it can deal with snow clearing, it can deal with bike parking, it can deal with park and rides, if that eats it all up, hey, we've won. So we are happier with that model because we know those funds will go back to meet those needs. When you say it goes into general revenues, well, you know, we want to support the TMP. There are some aspects of the general revenues that do not support the TMP. So this is a bird in hand, and we'll stick with it.
Happy with the handcuffs?
Well, you folks are the hand.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leeper, and thank you, Mr. Cullen. Our next speaker is Randall Kemp. Thank you for coming this morning, Mr. Kemp. You have 5 minutes to make your presentation, and I'll give you a little wave when you're getting close.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council. Great to be here, talk about parking again. I've been working in the neighborhoods of Wellington West for just over 30 years now. I manage a number of rental properties down there. I had participated in almost every single parking study and parking exercise that has been done in our neighborhood. And consistently through every single one, I have supported pay parking. I support the recommendations in this report. I have some comments on some of them, and I do not support the allocation of the parking reserve fund as detailed. My first concerns or questions actually are with regards to the expenditures that are listed on page 4. Just a comment about the latter part of the expenditures, the installation and maintenance of bicycle parking facilities. Wellington West has over 300 post and ring bike racks. We don't need more post and ring bike racks. What we need is cycling infrastructure to get to those post and ring bike racks. I just want to make the point that the report calls for road and sidewalk maintenance and life cycle costs. Just to make sure that the members of this committee understand that commercial property taxes are already at 2.5 times the residential tax rate. A large single-family house in a residential neighborhood on a 50 by 100 lot would probably pay about $8,000, $9,000 in property taxes. That same building on Wellington Street is paying in excess of $28,000 in property taxes every year. I just want to make the point that if we are going to put funds towards maintaining and repairing our commercial main streets, that's in addition to the money that we are already paying in our property taxes, meaning we increase the level of service on our streets. And that is critically important because as the population ages, we are simply not going to be able to have the level of maintenance that we experienced last winter. It's unacceptable, and it is not it is not in the best interests of our citizens. Then the next one is the support and maintenance and operation of development and parking right facilities. I'd like to come back to that in a moment. And then the last comment with regards to the expenditures and other related initiatives to encourage the use of sustainable modes of transportation. I guess the problem I have with this one is that what does encourage mean? Encourage in the sense that we're going to build cycling infrastructure, that we're going to build safe intersections for our pedestrians, or does it mean that we're just going to put ads in newspapers encouraging people to bicycle? And then finally, which brings us back to the earlier line, the contributions to the Parking Reserve Fund. Right now, the report suggests that the excess in the Parking Reserve be dedicated towards park and rides, and then life cycle costs on curb, sidewalk, and parking lane. We're not talking chump change here. The Parking Reserve Fund currently has about $23.9 or $24 million in the account. We're 90 days from the end of the year. There's probably an additional maybe $3.5 million that is going to go on top of that $24 million. So there's going to be maybe $8 million worth of Parking Reserve excess funds available for expenditure. Post and ring bike rack would probably cost about $200. A parking spot and a park and ride would probably be in excess of $35,000 a spot. OC Transpo, the current park and ride inventory currently has in excess of 9,000 free parking spaces. I do not believe that the funds from pay parking should be used to maintain and build new free parking. It is completely contrary to what this strategy is attempting to do. If we want to change the culture of our citizens to get around our city in other ways other than in their own little private automobiles, then we are going to have to eliminate free parking. I do support the earlier motion with regards to the, I forget what it was called.
Road Safety Action Plan?
Yes, the Safety Road Action Plan, and I do not support option 3. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kemp, for your presentation. Are there any questions to the delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming out today. I have no other delegations on my list, so we will go to questions to staff and to debate. I do have a list, so if people would like to ask questions, please let me know. Sorry, I'm just finishing the list from people who've already told me. So first is Councillor Fleury.
So I have questions on the report, and then I'm glad to dig a little deeper on the governance piece. But Scott, a couple of questions relating to, right now you're giving us a bottom and a ceiling relating to the reserve account. Anything that exceeds that, what gives us the authority under the Municipal Act to spend it to what appears to be anything? Because that's what I'm trying to gain under the current model, So if we found a loophole, then let's have that conversation. But I want to understand anything that exceeds what you're proposing to be $20 million, where can we spend that?
Chair, that remains parking fee revenue, and we are constrained by the municipal act, so any spending needs to be in alignment with the strategy and have a reasonable connection to parking.
So basically, it again goes back to the same structures of the municipal act constraints, which is we can only spend within paid parking zones. We can't give more money to Bryden to buy a couple more sidewalk plows.
Sure, that's correct. And the two allocations that we've identified are to spend that surplus of the park and rides and the life cycle, both meet those two criteria of alignment to the strategy and that connection to parking.
I'll come back to that later. The stakeholder parking group was brought up by one of the first delegations. I think the idea of engaging with groups is important. I think the reporting of that is challenging right now. There's no visibility to the conversation, so agenda, meeting minutes, reporting. So as a committee member, I know you're having those conversations because I hear from some of the stakeholders. I wonder what you can put in place so that there's more, for example, Dennis was not on the stakeholders group. That's fine, but the folks that might be interested in participating or being aware, how can we give some exposure to what's presented, what's discussed, and what's decided out of that forum?
Sure. One of the roles of each one of the members of the stakeholder group is to be that conduit back to their respective organizations, and so in the case of the BI representatives, so we trust that they're disseminating the information back, but that is something that we can take away to increase the transparency in terms of what's being discussed.
Yeah, I'd love for you to have a section on the website and just to land those agenda and minutes. At least that, I think, would give some transparency. Could that be a direction?
That's something that we will take away to determine what we can do, for sure. That's something we'll take away to determine what we can do, absolutely. Okay. Sorry.
I know you and I have had multiple conversations on this. I know where your mind's at, but I'm still not sure how we get there, which is we've given you some flexibility to move the charges around. We've given you a cap of, I guess today with the increase, it's around $4 or $3.50 or something. When do you plan to implement the dynamic? Because I think that's the issue, right? Is we're giving you the flexibility to review based on usage and so on, but I'm not seeing a dynamic, a day-to-day. We're heading into Canada Day. It's going to be busy. There's a high usership. We should charge a lot of money. When there's low ridership, and I think, streets like Westboro, who are maybe favorable to paid parking but concerned, everyone would jump on it if when there's low usage, there's low price. When there's high usage, there's high price. But we're not responding to that quickly enough, which I think puts us in that weird spot.
Chair, in providing a service, it is important for us in our approach to ensure that we are putting residents and visitors in a position where they can make informed decisions. There are models out there where rates change by time of day and by block, and that is very hard to put that information with the person in their vehicle so that they're making decisions. And in going to something that's zone-based with a consistent rate and broader increments than we may see elsewhere, I think we give ourselves a greater ability to communicate that so that we can have them make informed decisions, distribute the demands strategically, and better achieve our strategy goals.
I have an issue with it. I think it's the same idea that, the APIs are out there for gas stations to put their prices, and some smart app developer has created an app where you know where your gas prices are. So I would say let's release the pay and display data, and let's let the app developers have fun at it. We as committees set the top bar, so the very max you're going to pay when you get to the on-street. So I don't understand why we don't offer that dynamic piece now and then. Like, what is the ceiling? I think we're setting it out in this report what the ceiling would be.
Yeah, this is certainly a first step, and I think there's a number of things that have to happen, and we've identified our technology roadmap to fully consider what's coming and what our options are. In terms of enabling, again, residents, visitors to make those informed decisions, I think there's a few things that likely need to happen. In-vehicle information, that type of thing, because people aren't making those decisions on where to park, which block to park on when they're leaving their house. They're making those decisions when they're arriving at the location. So there's things that we're looking for that will help to move us along that continuum. I think this is an important first step towards potentially more dynamic pricing to reflect demand and to start the process.
Okay, and then my final question before I guess I get back on the list for my governance piece is relating to, so right now, my personal feeling is that, or my community's feeling is that we are creating imbalances on main streets. What we're doing is we're creating a retail environment where you don't want paid parking. It gives you the edge, no matter where that is. Today it's Westboro, tomorrow it'll be another street. So I want to understand how you're creating an environment that our main street in the core have a fairness element of pay and display based on usership, because the last thing we want is today to put in place the discussions on Westboro, which are uncomfortable for some, and for some, from a holistic point of view, I think we need to get there. But I don't want to just fix Westboro. I want it to be systemic, that as popularity grows in our main streets, that you're able to look at usership and start implementing it. By the way, I'd love to go further and look at U-Ottawa zones that are on residential streets near U-Ottawa. So I want to be clear that I'm even further than where we need to go.
So certainly the strategy that we're proposing accounts for that, and accounts for it further develops the process which was in the existing strategy to identify areas where there are parking related issues, parking management related issues, and we will continue to lean on our study process, which involves consultation and data collection, to assess those areas and make determinations on whether or not paid parking is a tool that is warranted, because there's a number of things we look at, but paid parking is one of those.
Mr. Chair, I have to get enough time.
Thank you very much. Councilor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Appreciate that. So I've got a few questions, and then I have a minor, I'm hoping, amendment to one of the objectives. Can we change the objectives here today? Is that possible, to amend an objective?
I guess that's a question to legal or the clerk.
It's an objective within the MPMS.
Chair, I would suspect through motion, the contents of the report could be changed.
Okay, it's very minor, but I'll get there when I get there. So thank you for all the work you've done. There's a lot of good in here. I know you've met with a lot of us and provided a lot of overview. I think there's good things here. The story will likely be, well, parking rates are going up, but that shouldn't be the story in my view. I think people obviously have to report on that, but the story for me is how much investment is going to be done on things like a bike parking strategy and snow clearing that's going to come along with this. And the net positives for our city in terms of a better transportation modal share and the expansion of what I see as some flexibility around where we can actually invest some of these funds. So I just appreciate the work you've done and where we are right now. I do have a few comments and criticisms as well, though. But in terms of the parking on evenings and weekends and looking at that, page 44 of the report talks about the fact that we do want to look at this and that staff are coming back with a report. We'll see a report. We'll see when. Maybe 2021, maybe later. Can I just encourage you to come back sooner rather than later on that? Ideally in 2020, end of 2020 would be better. I think if you're coming back end of 2021, this council is not going to see results from that. That's the way the budget cycles work. So can I actually ask you to come back sooner than what you're potentially preparing to do, and make sure that we actually get a good discussion going around that. It's been, I guess, 11 years since that discussion happened last time around, and I understand that the chief reason why we didn't implement anything on Sundays, for example, or look at it is around a lobby, essentially, and so that's fine. It's just, I think we can talk about it again, and now's the time to do it. So can I just give you that suggestion? In terms of the objectives in the MPMS report, you've got Objective 1, provide an appropriate and optimized supply of general use public parking. Can you just give me more on, what do you mean by optimized supply? To meet demand, to meet service levels? What does optimized supply mean to you?
Chair, it is important to have, and I'll use on-street first, and there's some examples that pertain to off-street as well, but for on-street parking we don't want it to be too heavily utilized, so we get into where there's not enough available parking, and then there can be a point at which it's not utilized enough, so the businesses are being underserved. So the optimized refers to, we're looking to get into that sweet spot, so to speak. And we take the same approach with our off-street facilities, that we'll find that balance between short-term and long-term, obviously prioritizing the short-term, but recognizing that we need to optimize our facilities.
Okay, I'll have some more just questions around that later on, and maybe in a second round of questioning. Objective number 2 talks about prioritizing short-term parking that is responsibly priced to support businesses, institutions, and tourism. I'd like to amend this objective and to add local communities in there. So it would be that prioritize short-term parking that is responsibly priced to support local communities, businesses, institutions, and tourism. It's just 2 words, Chair. I can write it out if you want, but it's just the 2 words going in to objective number 2. And now I'll definitely give them some more context. It speaks to several things. Dennis's presentation, I think, is clear around the need for local communities to be involved in this strategy. It does affect our local communities, what parking exists on their street nearby. Oftentimes it's them parking there and going to local businesses, whether, if it's paid or not. They're the ones that are engaging in it. And it also speaks to our stakeholder group. We've got community associations on our stakeholder group. We have three different community representatives there and 4 different BIAs. And so I just want to make sure we're not missing an entire group of folks here. This is not just about businesses. This is also about our local communities and where people park. So I'm hoping it's a friendly amendment around the table, but I just want to put that forward as well as part of the other motions that are going forward. Chair, I don't know if you want to consider that at the end of all this, or with your motion and Councillor Fleury's motion? Okay, I'll write it out. It's just 2 words, but I'll write it out. I'm going to continue. I'm not sure how much time I have left here. The on-demand work that you're doing. So instead of having sort of the dynamic pricing that other cities have implemented, you're saying that we're going to review these areas on a regular basis, and there could be increments of, was it 50 cents? Was that 50-cent increments that you would design to say, hey, in this area of Bank Street, there's high demand here at this time, so we need to increase this by 50 cents. Would the cap then go up from $4, or you're still saying, no, we have that hard $4 cap, that's the most it could be there, even if there is extremely high demand? I just want to be clarified on what that means.
So that maximum rate, in this case the maximum on-street rate, is something that's defined within the budget every year. As we go through this process and initiate this process and implement this demand-based model, if the situation occurs that we were to increase rates to $4 in an area, we would respond accordingly and move the maximum rate, so we had that ability to, that continued flexibility to move the rates up further. We didn't want to presume that we would be raising rates, especially since we're only going to be going through one cycle next year. There wasn't a need to set the bar any higher than $4 an hour.
Okay, so if demand warrants it, you're saying they could in fact go there? Is that sort of what I'm getting at? And it happened during the budget time? Okay.
Correct.
Because I mean, I had last committee meeting during a budget talked about looking at a 25-cent increase instead of a 50-cent increase. And there was concern then about doing something in the budget on that. But now we are going to be able to look at rates during a budget time. Is that clear? Okay.
Just to clarify, the maximum rate is set during the budget time. So if I may, a hypothetical in that we will raise the rate in an area next year and it be at $4. So we, as part of the 2021 budget, would suggest to raise the maximum threshold to $4.50, so we have that flexibility in 2021 to raise it further if the demand supports it.
Okay, thank you very much. I have, this is an important question for me around the reserve fund, and I guess the expanding definition of what is okay under the Municipal Act, or what we view as legally okay versus not, right? It was very thin before, and now we've expanded it, which I think is a good thing. And I also want to speak to Councillor Blais' motion, because it does appear that we have multiple ways to work with this, right? So in Councillor Blais' motion, which I support, it is saying, you know, we're going to be investing in projects that are currently underway that would be eligible to receive the funding under the Municipal Act, and that there can be a return of funds, an equivalent amount to the citywide reserve, which would normally be going to those projects, but it's going back to the citywide reserve. So ostensibly, the same principle could apply to multiple instances of projects that would meet the parking management strategy, but that may fall outside of what is a definition under the Municipal Act. And that's the key point for me around Councillor Fleury's motion as well. And my vote on that motion will entirely rest on this answer, because I don't want to go to a third-party system. But Councillor Fleury is putting this forward because we have such we've had such limited flexibility in where we can allocate those funds. And so for me, it seems that with Councillor Blais' motion, there's an opportunity here for flexibility. Are you reading that the same way as I am?
In proposing this new model and the new funding model, there was an opportunity that presented itself to allocate the surplus funds to current reconstruction projects, and those projects align with what is in the municipal parking management strategy and have that connection to parking because of the fact that paid parking exists there. If a similar instance were to occur again, then we would be able to allocate funds similarly.
Okay, that's very, very helpful for me to know, and I think reinforces my support then for the option you've put forward of option one. I hopefully Councillor Fleury sees that as well, just because that's how I'll be voting on that motion based on what they've just said. So I have other. Do you want me to leave it there, Chair? Or do I have time? Or okay, I can come back.
Okay, Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the work you've done on this. We're definitely moving forward. This week, we had a climate change strategy meeting with the sponsor group, and I have to ask, in terms of the climate change lens, how is it applied to this whole process? Because we're supposed to be reducing emissions by 80% to 100%, in 30 years or so. And, part of that is getting people out of their cars. Are we using a strategy in that respect? I just want to know if that's been taken into consideration.
Sure. I believe it's reflected in the objectives, and there's a balance to be struck between promoting and supporting sustainable modes of transportation, but also ensuring economic viability and supporting the businesses and the tourism industries that exist. So, there are a number of things that we do. When we look at our long-term rates, we are providing parking through roughly 17 facilities in the city, and our objective there is to make those about short-term parking and dissuade the long-term parking at those facilities and dissuade the commuter parking that's associated with that. So there are some things we do, but it's at the end of the day about striking that balance between sustainable modes and viable business and economic development.
Thank you. One of the things that's coming up is bike parking, and I mean, there's two ways to look at it. There's actual parking, like the rings to put your bike in. There's also the park and cycles, and we have one that's going to be a pilot project in my area, and I expect that they're going to be very popular. The NCC is also doing them, and can that be supported in this?
Sure, that is something that I think we'll consider as part of the scope with the bike parking strategy going forward.
Okay, that's very encouraging. And again, I appreciate the suggestion about the bike sharing, because I think it can fit in as well to encourage people to not be going all the way downtown, perhaps, and picking up a sharing bike. So that's helpful. Have we ever looked at a strategy in terms of, parking that is, where there's an alternative, i.e. it's on the LRT route, and, therefore the person could have taken the LRT. Could we charge more there to those parking spots versus one that's where there's no or very little modes of transportation or transit?
Chair, I'm aware of a park and ride strategy that's currently under development, and I would defer to my colleagues with transportation planning specifically on any questions related to rate structures and park and rides related to LRT.
Okay, thank you. I do think that we have to look at parking as an issue. It's always one of the things that comes up, even in a ward like mine where I do not have any pay and display parking, but people, obviously use it a lot. So, and I appreciate the comments that have been brought forward. Just a clarification on the snow clearing, just so people know, this is only for areas around parked cars, correct? Like this is to do with the, on the side of the street parking, that the snow clearing will happen. This is not a general boost to the budget totally for snow clearing.
So in areas with paid parking, dealing with the windrows, and snowbanks and what have you, this would be additional snow clearing of those, specifically where there is paid parking.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that people know that. So, no, I'm hoping we're going to, over time encourage people to look at other modes of transportation for sure. So this is a good first step. I know that there's the restriction of the Municipal Act. I don't know what would happen if we actually, were caught out or told we were, violating the Municipal Act. What's the worst thing that could happen?
Defer to legal and
We've provided advice to staff with regards to the Municipal Act requirements, and generally the parking management strategy complies with the Municipal Act. The costs are related to the services that are provided through that strategy, and if there's a deviation beyond that, then it would be considered indirect taxes. So that would be where a challenge would occur. And that's why the funds are kept in a separate reserve, is so that they're not commingled with general revenues, and that they can be used for the parking strategy purposes and those objectives.
But what would happen if we cross the line?
So that would open it up to a legal challenge.
From the provincial government?
It would, yeah, for the bylaw itself.
Okay. Can we not ask the provincial government to be more flexible in terms of, we're not going to open it up wide, but there's obviously an appetite for other forms of transportation, and it could be used exclusively for that. Have we ever investigated that?
Well, there's been challenges all the way up to the Supreme Court on this matter, so it's pretty clear law that the fee has to be connected to the service provided. Otherwise, it's considered an illegal indirect tax.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. First off, it feels like, Scott, you and I have been talking about parking for a good 3 years now. Obviously, I think part of the reason we're sitting here today is because of, I think it was Councillor Eagle-Eye in the last term of council who questioned why paid parking wasn't going into Wellington West and Westboro. And here we are changing the framework for parking that will probably lead to paid parking in Westboro and West Wellington. And I'm supporting today's report and removing what I've been calling the veto from councillors' hands, community associations and BIAs with eyes wide open to where this is likely going. I do have some questions that might suggest tweaks to the regime, but I'm not sure that they do. Are there any areas in Ottawa where charging the maximum parking rate has not brought demand down to that Goldilocks 85% utilization?
So with the maximum on-street rate being $3 an hour right now, we do have some areas where we see high utilization. In terms of what that means, we will conduct this thorough process to assess all zones across the city starting next year and identify where, if anywhere, the rates need to be raised to account for that, to bring it, with the objective to bring it into that Goldilocks zone, that sweet spot.
I'm wondering at that $4 number, that doesn't give you a ton of wriggle room, and I wonder what kind of analysis went into ascertaining that $4 is the right number so that if you needed to go to the maximum in order to manage demand down to that sweet 85% spot, that's going to be the right number as opposed to asking for $4.50 or $5. Is that just a political consideration?
No, so the maximum on-street rate is set within the budget every year, and we would have the ability, if we wound up at $4 somewhere, to explore raising that maximum further in subsequent years to create that flexibility, and that would be the goal.
So by adopting today's report, we're not handcuffing you with respect to having the flexibility to implement the maximum pricing you need in order to achieve the outcome that you're looking for?
No, the maximum is determined and approved as part of budget each year.
Okay. Now, one area where there is a really big gap between one number and the next is with respect to removing paid parking. And my understanding is that paid parking has been removed when it wasn't achieving the objective that we were seeking. I believe the report would say that you would consider removing paid parking for an area if utilization fell to 50%, or the amount charged is $1. So by the time we get to, you know what, we're only charging $1 an hour, it's still only 50% used, that's the threshold at which you would contemplate removing paid parking.
That's correct. It wouldn't be an automatic process, but the consideration would be given.
And I noticed the word consideration in the report as doing that. That's a really big difference from, you know what, our paid parking study says, you know, we're over the 85% utilization. We're going to implement paid parking, but if that was a mistake and parking started to fall and even, you know, a couple bucks an hour brought us down to 60%, do you need more flexibility to remove parking if it turns out to have been implemented in light of factors we hadn't considered?
Considering a couple things. First of all, if we were to implement paid parking in a new area, we would not necessarily, or consideration would be given to introducing it at not at the maximum rate, but it's location specific. And also that we are endeavoring to undertake this review twice a year. The amount of time it would take to account for that and correct for that wouldn't be years or years and years. It would happen in a shorter period of time.
When we've removed paid parking from an area in past, and this is an important part of what I'm telling community stakeholders, is, you know what, I mean, our goal is not to get revenue. Our goal is to manage parking so that there is parking available for local businesses, which in Wellington West and Westboro we hear about all the time. They want to know that if it was a mistake, that the paid parking will come out. Where paid parking has come out, can you give me some color around what happened there?
Absolutely. So there is an area in Vanier. We did a local area parking study. So paid parking existed from the river, not quite as far as Saint Laurent, but Granville, I think, roughly. And a study was done in roughly 2013. And one of the recommendations of that study was to reduce the rate to $2 an hour and go back and look at it again. And as part of the process to going back and reassessing it, it was determined that the area of Vanier west of the Vanier Parkway, so between the river and Vanier Parkway, had responded, and there was an appropriate level of demand. But east of the Vanier Parkway, there had not been any appreciable change in demand. So the decision was made at that point in time to remove the paid parking in that area. So that was before what we're proposing now. So it would be a little more regimented now. It was a judgment call at the time based on the conditions.
So the likelihood that we're going to put paid parking into an area on the basis of analysis that is not rich enough is lower if we approve the changes you're asking for today. It's a lower chance of that happening.
I would say that's correct.
Okay. In the report in the section on environmental sustainability, one of the key business KBIs, key business indicators that you're proposing to report on every year is the number of bike spots, but I think you've specifically said you're not going to report on utilization of those bike spots. Is there a reason why not? I mean, it would be very, very handy to have that data to understand some of the modal shifts we're trying to accomplish.
I envision that bike parking utilization is going to be a deliverable coming from the bike parking strategy.
Okay, perfect. The last area is with respect to the governance and who's going to control parking, who's going to have the revenues, can we use it as a dividend? Have we calculated, once you include the overhead of a municipal services corporation, it's board meetings, it's executive, it's staff, what kind of impact would that have on the amount of surplus revenues that are being returned to the city? Have those numbers been done?
We have not engaged in a thorough analysis of that. We have identified, however, that, I mean, there would be currently within parking services, we leverage shared services or finance, legal services within the city. So there would be a requirement for additional resources within an arm's length entity, board members, leased space. There are costs in terms of what that exact number is. We don't have that.
Okay, because my assumption is that the parking revenues being returned back to the city after expenses would be diminished as a result of setting up the overhead associated with a third-party entity.
And that's our expectation.
Yeah, but we don't have the exact amount of that. One piece, and I think this is a question for maybe legal, that I am really pleased to see that you are proposing to put together a technology roadmap. Who's going to put that roadmap together? I believe you're working with our IT staff and with what I assume will be a new CIO hired sometime reasonably soon.
The focus of that will be on a scan of the industry and specifically the parking industry, and in terms of there'll be an overlap of what's happening and types of technologies that are coming at us. We'll either be coordinating that internally, or we will be coordinating that internally. Whether we bring in somebody externally to provide an additional perspective is something that we'll determine following this.
Okay. IT security is something that the city is thinking really hard about right now. I just want to make sure that as new solutions get rolled out across, that we're centralizing some of those decisions with someone who has that bigger look at security considerations within the city. And then does this report for legal, it's not part of the resolution that they're going to deliver a technology roadmap. Your reading of this report, does it require them to do that? I have no doubt they will, but I just want to ensure that it's deliverable by way of motion.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Through you're suggesting through a motion?
Yeah, so right now, as I read the report, I'm not entirely certain whether it requires them now to deliver the technology roadmap.
Right.
Do you believe that the way the report is written and the resolutions that we'll be passing require them to deliver a technology roadmap?
Direction would be sufficient direction from the committee.
So you'll take that as direction, I assume, to deliver a technology roadmap in the time frame in the report? Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question is very simple, and I did bring this up during the briefings. The words park and ride are a real trigger word for a lot of people. And many moons ago, before I even got in council, decisions were made that, you know, we're going to not build new parking structures inside the Greenbelt because it encourages people from Orleans to drive into my district and park there. I just want to confirm, how do we determine if any of this money is going to park and rides? Would that be still true? I just want to make sure it's on the record, because I get a lot of emails about that. Oh, great, they're going to build a park and ride at Blair Station, which would certainly not be the case.
I'm going to defer to Phoebe with transportation planning.
Chair, as part of our TMP, we are taking a review of the park and ride strategy. And the essence of a park and ride strategy is to capture the commuters before they start heading into the downtown area or into inside the Greenbelt, because once they're there, they may continue driving through. So, the strategy that we have is being refreshed and updated as part of the overall transportation network plan as part of the TMP.
Great. So just to clarify, my statement would be probably quite correct that there would not be a new park and ride Tunney's, Blair inside the Greenbelt. That wouldn't be on the horizon.
For the LRT stations, I think the land is very valuable to be used for other purposes, such as intensification, because we want to support the ridership along the LRT. So it's unlikely that we would be looking for parking around these major hubs.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fleury.
So this is more comments and context for my motion. So many members of council recognize that this is one of the only groups that generates money at the city. We offer a lot of services, and this is one of the groups that generates dollars. I like the analysis. I think generally we're heading in the right direction. I think we have legal constraints that we can try to dodge as much as we want, but we're caught by the Municipal Act that we cannot, any money we collect, we have to spend to that program, a user fee environment. We can't take that money and, based on council's priority, reestablish where that money should go. So, interestingly enough, the current model that's proposed by staff helps me. I'm entirely paid zone. Think about, so all the money that would generate, I would benefit from directly, just to be clear. But I don't think that that's the right thing. I think that everyone that has non-pay and display areas, because we're only talking about the areas where we have paid lots or pay and display. I think councillors that don't have pay and display zones should actually benefit from those revenue sources relating to improved snow operations, improved crosswalks, improved. So I think, you know, I recognize that many would be uncomfortable based on the review that was done, and the review is fair. I'm not dodging the review, but I think this is a political decision. Do we want to be able to generate revenue and spend it where the priorities should be, or do we want to continue to be caught under the Municipal Act and have to be very creative as to how we fund these things? I think that we would do best to set council priorities and spend that money there. So, you know, vote as you wish, but I think the motion sets out the context that if you don't have pay and display and you want council priorities to dominate where we're investing, then that is a tool that we can use. I also think that we are not progressive enough relating to the dynamic elements of paid zones. I think we should really be in paid lots and on-street parking, be a lot more active to the period of the year and be more data-focused and quick on the data response. Right now, we're setting up models where the research and the analysis needs to be done, and yes, it will be adapted, but we're not responsive enough. So by the time the results come in, things around us have shifted. Think of when the analysis was done prior to Lansdowne, and then Lansdowne comes in, and we move things around. Well, that could continuously bring some changes into the system. So I would agree with, I think, every speaker that we're heading in the right direction. I just wish we'd gone further. I'm happy that we're providing the flexibility to not be caught for approvals on the pay zone, so that's certainly a great thing. And I would certainly recommend to committee to consider my motion if you want council's priority to dominate where we're spending those revenue dollars. If not, we're still doing the right thing and we're adding some flexibility, but rest assured it'll be in zones that are paid zones already, which I happen to be included.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fleury. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to encourage my colleague, Councillor Fleury, to look around the room. I look at the back and I see bylaw, and they're pretty good revenue generators themselves, and building code services actually pays for itself with the revenues that it's collecting. So there is, on the budget line, there is quite a few revenue sources here at the city. I would encourage my colleague that if he wanted support from people like myself that are outside, representing residents outside the Greenbelt, that he would have shared that motion ahead of time, instead of sending it to me while I'm on my way to the committee. So for that reason, I can't support it. I haven't had a chance to look at it. These folks have come around. They met with all of us several times. They kept us informed on what was going on with the consultations, why they were making their recommendations, and I think they did a very good job. And I'm going to support that instead of making a last-minute change here on the table. One question for you with this, as you mentioned earlier, you said that the Gold Pass fees from the park and rides go into your pot of money. So does that mean that in wards where there are park and ride, that we can access those funds to buy like bike racks, for example, to encourage more people to bike to the park and ride in cases of overcrowding at the park and rides? And the second part of that is, would those funds contribute towards a pathway link that is needed to the park and ride for transit users?
So, Chair, to the first part, bike parking, and as part of what's being proposed, it's an additional funding in bike parking, but also in an expanded scope where we're not only limited to invest in bike parking in paid areas. So, yes, I think, and this was something that we'll settle out through the bike parking strategy to, again, to define what gets installed and where and when and based on what criteria. As it is still parking considered to be parking fee revenue, we would need to align it with the strategy and have a direct connection to parking specifically. So sitting here now, I would say that the pathway would likely not qualify for those revenues.
Okay, so one yes, one no. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councillor Fleury on a point of privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recognize my colleague's points and will respect his vote on the motion. It's important for us at committee to be humbled, and if there's a motion that's brought at the table, including the chair's motion, that I will be supportive, for which I did not get notice. and you've been a member of council for some time, and I'm the one who directed staff years ago as part of this review to add the governance review. So, you know, if this is new information for you, that's fine, but I certainly have been on the record for years relating to my interest in going to a non-for-profit, and I would be careful. I've heard it from a series of members of we're not doing us a favor by challenging that motions be brought to the table. This is the tools that governs us, that we can bring motions, you can vote against the motion. I'm okay with that. But we have to be able to vote, we have to be able to use those tools and not be worried that, hey, if 24 hours in advance we didn't do that, that we won't get the support from colleagues. So I will support you when you bring a motion to the table if I believe it's the right thing, and I hope that you do if it's the right thing. Don't vote for my motion today, that's fine, but I would not remove that tool that we have as elected members at committee.
Thank you very much. Councilor Menard on the report.
Thanks very much. And Chair, I did write out the motion. Thank you, Councilor Leeper, for that. And it's before staff now, so it just adds local communities into the second objective. I have a few other questions. Is there a reason why we just have 3 community representatives on the group that meets instead of 4, sort of an equal amount to BIAs? Is it just the way it was thought of previously, or some other thought process around it?
Yeah, we're modeled off of what was originally designed, and we've made some adjustments to that. I don't think there's any intent behind it. It's just that was the team to be a reasonable distribution. I think we should generally have more BIA interest than community association interest, so that might be reflective of that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess if there's interested community members in canvassing them, it may be worthwhile saying this equal amount, but I'll leave that with you folks. In terms of the process here, I'm well aware there's going to be some areas that are looked at for more paid parking areas that don't exist now. So Westboro, Old Ottawa South, it could be looked at soon. So what is the timing, if we pass the motion today, how quickly will the city start to look at those areas that are currently not charged? What's the process from here for you folks?
Well, I think you referenced Westboro, Wellington West, and it's been discussed at a couple points today. The existing study that was tabled in 2017 has data which we will seek to update, and I envision a report next year on that.
Next year?
Next year.
Okay.
Correct, yeah.
Next year.
We'll clarify timing on that. Any other areas we will review in the course of doing our local area parking studies, and we will include them on our work plan as issues are either identified to us or we flag things. We are monitoring a number of areas for parking issues, and we will continue to do so.
Some of this fund, so under the funding model review and some of the proposed outcomes that we've talked about, you've got funds going into, things like bike share programs, potential planned installations of bike parking, clarified scope to road services, winter, non-winter maintenance. Most of this is where there's paid parking already. So if there's a paid parking, they're going to get some extra funds to help plow that street, maybe plow the bike lanes that weren't previously plowed as a result of what we're looking at now. But that additional funding, does that then free up some space? Because previously it was funded, right? Does that free up some space to be able to plow residential sidewalks or, give Mr. Denise some more flexibility on other areas that may not have had the funding previously? Is it going to be used as an offset, or is it going to be used as an increase in service that wasn't there before on those roads? I just want to clarify what we have a bucket of money that we spend on road clearing every year and bike lanes and other sidewalk clearing, and so I just want to know how that'll happen.
So the increased snow removal will be an increased level of service being provided. With the transfer, and we currently transfer, I believe the number is $3.4 million on average a year to roads.
3.4?
$3.4 million, and that's to cover, excuse me, to cover costs related to street sweeping, snow clearing, and it's intended to be a proportion of the overall road network. So there's a calculation that goes into that. To this point, that calculation has been outdated and somewhat ad hoc. So we've, as part of this process, and we've gone through all the transfers, whether it be all of our internal transfers, to ensure that they're appropriate. And so we fixed the roads transfer to create a formula from it that is repeatable and reflects actual costs as a proportion of the total road network, both for sidewalks, permit parking, and paid parking in the core areas specifically.
Okay, that's helpful. And our plan is to actually increase that yearly operational spend by another $1 million about. Is that right?
So again, we're correcting for what was already transferred, and then what was already transferred was based on metrics that were 20 years old.
Okay.
So we're bringing that up to date. So they're based on 2018. If we were to recalculate 2018, we've identified that the transfer to roads to properly account for the work that they do and within the parking areas would be $700,000 higher.
Okay, and so there's $700,000 additional going to there, and then we're also saying on an operational spend item, this is new, would have about $400,000 going into things like snow clearing to access bike parking facilities, additional staff in the bike parking area, and other sustainable modes of transportation spend. So is that still $400,000, or are we looking at a larger number in the operational side for that?
On the operational side, that's what we've identified, or that's what we've estimated at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful as well. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have anything to say? No? Okay. Well, I will share a few thoughts. I want to thank our staff for the hard work that they've put in over the last year and a half, 2 years to develop the strategy. I know that it's taken a huge team, quite a lot of time, and it's also cost the city quite a lot of money to prepare this report. And so I would urge members of the committee to consider that carefully as they make their decisions today. Obviously, I support my motion to use the funds that are returned to invest in road safety. I think it is a good mechanism that we can use as the surplus changes over time. I think we need to be cautious about trying to bank operational money with the surplus. The surplus might not always be there, and if we create an operational burden on a source of funds that is not stable, that could lead to other challenges into the future. And that's the main reason why I don't support Councillor Fleury's motion at this time, because there is just not any guarantee that if we use those funds that are provided through the flexibility of the corporation, that we become reliant on money that might not always be there. If we look into the future, the parking reserve may need to be used to build new paid parking spaces, and so therefore the account might and is probably likely to drop below the $20 million maximum in this term of council, if not shortly thereafter, based on what's on the horizon. Could staff comment very quickly on Councillor Menard's motion on changing or adding the word community to the objectives of the strategy?
Chair, I'm cautious because the wording was very deliberately arrived at in consultation with our parking stakeholder consultation group and then validated through this lengthy process. And I believe it requires some reflection to actually consider the implications. And I'm trying to be fair to the consultation process that occurred. It's not as easy, and I understand it's adding in a couple words, but I'm wary of the implications, and again, respecting the consultation process.
What kind of effort would it take to consult with those who we've consulted with to get a sense of their feelings?
No, I think that could be done relatively easily. It's just it's something that I would require a little bit more time, but not a lot more time to determine our recommendation on whether it's something that fits.
Just on that, maybe can I give notice then to come back, or would it be out of order then?
One second. So perhaps as opposed to voting on the motion today, committee can provide you direction to explore the impact of such a change and report back to us within a reasonable amount of time.
Yes, we'd take that direction.
Is that acceptable, Councillor?
Okay.
Perfect, thank you very much. So I think, and clerks can correct me, I think the proper ordering of the motion should be Councillor Fleury's first, and then mine, and then the report. Does that sound just about right?
Using names, I imagine, on my motion.
That sounds about right?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct, Chair, sorry.
Perfect, thank you very much. So on the first amendment, or the first motion from Councillor Fleury, he's asked for yeas and nays, and this is to move to a municipal corporation to manage parking.
Okay. Councillor Dudas.
No.
Councillor El Shantiri.
No.
Councillor Fleury.
Oui.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Derouz.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
No.
Vice Chair Leeper.
No.
And Chair Blais.
No.
Lost.
Thank you very much. On the next motion, the motion from myself on moving the surplus to existing projects and using that returned revenue for the Road Safety Action Plan. Carried. Thank you very much. And on the report from staff? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of your hard work. Item number 3 is the status update, Transportation Committee increase in motions for the period ending for the 20th of September.
Received.
Is this received? Received, thank you very much. There is one councillor's item, Femi Laporte and Cardinal Creek Drive speed limit reduction, that the Transportation Committee recommended council reduce the speed limit on Femi Laporte Avenue and Cardinal Creek Drive from 50 kilometers an hour to 40 kilometers an hour for the entire length of these roads. Carried. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Can I have a motion to pull the IPD?
There are no in-camera items. We have an IPD about traffic calming on King Edward. Councillor Fleury.
Mr. Chair, would it be possible to refer this item to the agenda for next transportation, just to allow my community to properly be informed and as well as participate?
Yes. Moved and carried. Perfect. Thank you very much. Are there any notices of motion for future meetings? None. Any inquiries? Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much. Yes, I have an inquiry regarding statement by the mayor on September 24th relating to the Prince of Wales Bridge, that it is not the right choice for a light rail transit connection, considering the city originally planned a rail line to be extended across the bridge. I have the following question. On what basis were we provided that this would be no longer an option to have the bridge as a viable plan?
Thank you very much, Councillor. We do have a presentation next month relating to this issue, I do believe. But thank you for the inquiry. Is there any other business? Seeing none, are we adjourned?